Simulate the universe, starting with speed through Greece. Chapter 1. Splash. A basin of cold water poured over his head in the darkness. Under the assault of the biting cold, the consciousness of this body gradually began to revive. Before he could even open his eyelids, a voice filled with disgust and indifference already reached his ears. If you're not dead, hurry up and get up. Snap out of it, you service Latin for slave, also meaning a talking tool. What? A voice. His consciousness gradually cleared. Before he could figure out the situation. Crack tilde. A whip lashed out, and a burning, stinging pain immediately shot through his back. Yi suddenly woke up with a start. And immediately took a sharp breath. At the same time, a large, clear memory flooded his mind. Simply put, he had transmigrated to a strange, barbaric ancient Western world. The exact time was unclear. But he had already spent about 2 weeks in this world. The reason he had such a clear awareness was due to his body's keen biological clock. It seemed that due to the transmigration, his body had undergone some changes, and his perception had become stronger, allowing him to clearly perceive the passage of time. He had a vague feeling that from now on, he would never mistake his own temporal changes, nor would he lose himself in the journey of time. And the only use for this change right now was that it allowed him to clearly remember how long he had been in this world. 2 weeks since transmigrating. A week and a half spent wandering in the desert, finally finding a town. Only to discover it was a civilized nation like medieval Western Europe. He hadn't even determined what era he had arrived in, or if it was simply a completely fictional otherworld. After that, Yi, due to his handsome Eastern face, which was different from the locals, was captured by malicious slave traders and sold to a slave owner. Due to prolonged lack of food and dehydration, he fell into a coma, sleeping for 3 days. Fortunately, his body seemed to have been strengthened during the transmigration, and his vitality was extremely tenacious, allowing him to persist for so long without falling into too much danger. And during the time he was asleep, no one came to attend to him. Until, the slave owner who bought him seemed to finally remember that he had a rare Eastern-faced slave. Although his body did not look strong or robust, his handsome face and unique exotic charm would surely be favored by many rich women, and even big lords with peculiar tastes. The slave owner who bought him had the intention of offering him to nobles and reselling him for a good price. Therefore, after buying him at a high price, he had never really tormented him. But he had been in a coma for 3 days. And the slave owner was worried that he might not wake up and actually die. Thus, the scene where the slave owner personally came to check on him and took action occurred. After one lash, the slave owner stopped. Yi's body was clearly not as tough as those strong slaves. He was worried he might whip him to death. This lazy fellow. Thank my benevolence. This time I'll only whip you once. Next time, you won't be so lucky. Stand up, you lowly slave. Don't make me repeat myself. And at this moment, Yi, who had completely recalled what had happened, heard the arrogant and contemptuous words. He suppressed the anger in his heart and raised his head. When he saw the slave owner's indifferent expression, every cell in Yi's body seemed to tremble, and then he slowly lowered his head in submission. He had just noticed that the other party was holding a weapon, and his physique was incredibly tall and strong, at least 1.90 meters tall. Although Yi was also over 1.80 meters, his current weak body could probably be easily pushed down even by a child. He had no capital to resist. Cannot resist. Although he wouldn't die, he might suffer quite cruel torment. Yi, who understood how dark ancient Western European slavery was, knew how foolish it would be to choose to resist at this moment. To escape, he could only wait for an opportunity. The most important thing now was to solve the hunger problem first. When Yi obediently stood up. Very good. This is your reward. Should one say, speak of the devil. The slave owner nodded in satisfaction. Then took out the food and water he had brought. After all, he was a high-grade slave. Given his inherent monetary value, he was equivalent to a walking human banknote. Who would be overly harsh with money, or unable to part with it? On the contrary, when he bought Yi, the slave owner had already learned that the other party had just been captured and had not undergone any training or discipline. Such free people, suddenly reduced to slaves, initially had very strong resistance. Now, Yi's obedience greatly exceeded his psychological expectations. If it were those Greeks captured from the neighboring battlefield, they would undoubtedly cause him unpleasant commotions every day and need to be properly disciplined. No one likes a barking mad dog, nor do they like troublemakers. Correspondingly, to those who knew their place, even a cold-blooded slave owner would not begrudge a display of false kindness. The meal prepared for Yi was very rich, with both meat and vegetables. The food was not only not bad, but quite good. This was clearly not the treatment an ordinary slave should receive. To prevent the slave from regaining too much strength and having the capital to resist. Plus the high cost of meat, almost no slave owner would waste meat on these slaves. Except for those warriors specifically trained for the gladiatorial arena. But although Yi was not in this situation, and his body did not look strong, even if he ate and drank his fill, the slave owner was not worried that he would have the strength to escape. Instead, to ensure he would fetch a good price, the slave owner needed him to quickly recover his mental and physical appearance. After 2 weeks of wandering, Yi, although clearly having a good foundation, had skin that looked as if it had been weathered by sandstorms. This could not be considered a qualified commodity. And a healthy, handsome slave should be worth double. Afterward, seeing Yi still devouring his food, the slave owner did not wait there, but closed the cage and turned to check on the other slaves' cages. And it was at this moment, Yi, who was frantically eating, stiffened and suddenly stopped. As if discovering something, he trembled all over at this moment. System. It seemed not. No reaction. But in his soul, he indeed perceived an incredibly vast, immense, mysterious object, like a galaxy or a universe. As his spirit, which had slightly recovered after eating, returned, that dormant substance also seemed to gradually awaken, sweeping away Yi's recent feeling of weakness. At this moment, he felt incredibly bloated, even heart-pounding, as if his soul might explode at any moment from not being able to contain that thing, which would be a normal occurrence. It was like stuffing a planet's core into an ordinary person's body, yet maintaining a miraculous stability. The scene unfolding before his eyes was even more incredible and shocking than stuffing an elephant into an ant's shell, yet it was undeniably real. However, Yi was absolutely certain that he had been just an ordinary person before this, without a mother named Kafka. Nor was he white-haired or had golden eyes. Nor did he possess any magical powers. Therefore, what the hell is this? A bonus perk with the transmigration. This stellar nucleus is not that stellar nucleus. Good heavens. Yi's pupils contracted, and a sense of foreboding arose in his heart. This thing shouldn't suddenly explode, right? Exploding inside his soul. Even after death, he would be annihilated. He barely suppressed the urge to curse, hesitating for less than a few seconds. Forget it, I'll recover my strength first. Yi began to devour the food. Perhaps it was because such a bizarre thing as transmigration had occurred. Or perhaps it was the long journey of struggling against the harshness of nature in the desert that had allowed his heart to mature. Yi's mentality was frighteningly stable. For someone who had struggled on the edge of death several times, nothing was more moving than enduring the pain of hunger now. When finally, after devouring the last bite, Yi's mind also became extremely clear. And he felt that his strength had recovered a lot. While the slave owner hadn't returned yet, it seemed like it was time to investigate what exactly was inside his body. Honestly speaking, although he felt that the thing was inside his soul, it was just a feeling. After all, it wasn't easy to say whether the soul even existed. But what was very magical was that the current Yi could feel an invisible, intangible spiritual power. It was this powerful spiritual power that allowed him to clearly feel the nucleus that was even more vast than a planet. Even the slightest radiance emanating from it made his soul feel a burst of comfort, as if it was constantly growing stronger. If it could continue to strengthen, perhaps one day his soul could grow to be as vast as a planet or a universe. Grow to the extent that it could accommodate this thing. But, compared to natural growth, Yi was more worried that it might suddenly crack and explode in the next moment. This thing felt unstable, even somewhat violent. But it was stubbornly bound within his soul. A very magical feeling. Perhaps it could give him the power to escape from here. Then, along with Yi's research, in the dark, sunless dungeon, even time became worthless. Finally, After countless attempts, Yi's spiritual body broke through the inner vision of his soul and entered the interior of the stellar nucleus. Well, let's tentatively name this thing stellar nucleus for now. And then there was no then. Boom tilde. A violent impact suddenly struck his spirit. Just entering the interior of the stellar nucleus. Without seeing anything yet, there were golden red light spots, like countless Ganges sands, directly like a torrent, like a tsunami. Sweeping in like swallowing the universe. Then Yi's consciousness directly crashed. After an unknown amount of time, a childish, melodious voice suddenly rang in his ear. Look what I've found. A reckless soul dares to impact the long river of the multiverse concept with that meager, pitiful spiritual body. Thank me for bringing your spiritual body back at a critical moment. Although it is only a conceptual universe. Not a real world, but in the vast number of worlds like smoke. The soul of an ordinary human is like an ant that has strayed into the sea. I'm afraid it will be swallowed in an instant. When Yi opened his eyes and looked in the direction of the voice, a somewhat familiar cute girl appeared in his eyes. The first thing that caught his eye was the black and white gothic pleated skirt, as well as the slender, fair and tender legs with skin as breakable as a baby's. Further up, a delicate face like a doll, without any flaws. Like God's perfect creation, appeared in his eyes. At this time, the owner of that face was looking down at this side with a pair of violet-like, gorgeous eyes that seemed to speak. It was the face of this expressionless, emotionless beautiful girl. That was somewhat overly familiar. Yi, Herta. The image of the girl in front of him gradually overlapped with the appearance of a doll made by a talented player in a certain game that was popular before the transmigration. Even Yi was once a member of the many XP players who wanted to have a Herta doll. And at this time, the girl who looked exactly like Herta in his impression, suddenly showed a strange smile on her emotionless pretty face, as if she had thought of something. And stretched out a smooth, white and tender little leg. Herta, do you want to lick it? You seem to be very fond of the appearance of this doll. Although it will feel disgusting. If it is your request, I will not refuse. Yi. Even if I'm fond of it, is it really okay to express it in such a perverted way right from the start? He suspected that his personality had been insulted. Who would lick the feet of their two-dimensional wife just because they like them? There won't be any thoughts of, you really know people. Herta, you hesitated just now, I can feel it. Why resist the desires of your heart? Strange person. Yi, who are you? And where is this? Under the unclear situation, who has the time to think about that kind of thing? At this time, Yi began to quietly look around the environment. And found that he was in a dreamlike space like an aurora curtain. And in the front of the space was a circular halo like the experimental gate of a certain, simulated universe, in his impression. And Herta was standing beside it. The scene in front of him was very similar to the scene in the game. It almost made Yi suspect that he had transmigrated again. But he could sense that he was a spiritual body now, and his body was still in the dungeon outside. Obviously, this was not a transmigration. And facing Yi's question. Herta, I don't know. Yi, don't know. Herta, if you want to ask about my identity and name. Indeed, I don't know. I have been here since I was consciously born. To be exact, I have only just been born not long ago. My existence is more like an artificial AI born from the stellar nucleus for you to learn how to master your power. Well, the name of the stellar nucleus is also taken from your impression. I don't know what this thing is in itself. I don't know why it would combine with you into one. But the only thing that is certain is, although it is not clear why your soul can carry this terrifying thing. But once your body dies, a soul without a vessel will also perish, and at that time, what will become of the stellar, composed of the conceptual river of this infinite world, and what consequences will arise? I don't think you'd want to know. You just need to understand that you are now inextricably bound together. To prevent you, as the container, from being too incompetent and dying. The originally unconscious, stellar, instinctively created me. As for the current appearance in this space, they were constructed merely to facilitate your understanding of how to use the stellar in a way you are familiar with. Here, you don't have to worry about being bombarded into idiocy by those countless cosmic conceptual entities. Instead, you will learn how to gradually control those cosmic concepts. and finally grow into a container that can truly perfectly house the stellar Yi growth experience, recreating accumulated years. Yi expressed his he. If he could choose to restart his life, he would absolutely not want to be bound to such a terrifying thing. Although it sounded quite wonderful. To be able to become stronger with the help of this miraculous power, and finally grow into a container, capable of perfectly holding even the exaggerated, stellar, formed by the convergence of countless cosmic conceptual entities he just saw. If he truly reached that point, that would probably be, my body is the universe. No, it should be the multiverse. He would be no less than those omniscient and omnipotent deities, God from myths and legends who created and uncreated worlds. But how long such a growth journey would take was hard to say. Yi was very skeptical. How much longer his tiny soul could burn without being burst by it. In a certain kindling world, even the undead, kindling Lord Kenkatsu, wouldn't dare burn like this. He was no longer mere ash. He wasn't even dregs. Even if compared to a single universe, his weak soul should not have been able to withstand it for a moment. It was 10,000, 100 million, a trillion times more absurd than trying to stuff an elephant into a mineral water bottle. Although he didn't know why such a bizarre stability could be formed now. A strong sense of urgency appeared in Yi's heart to prevent this stability from breaking, such as the stellar suddenly becoming unrestrained and bursting him. So he originally thought that being stranded in the desert and having to survive in the wilderness after transmigration was already miserable enough. And it was already extremely unfortunate to finally get out of the desert only to be captured and sold as a slave owner. Could there be an even more serious crisis than now? Then, reality told him, yes. Yi had thought that after several survival experiences and hovering on the brink of death, his mindset had matured considerably. But in the face of such an outrageous situation, he still couldn't hold back. How do I use this power? Yi asked. If he didn't think about the 1 in 10 million chance of self-destruction. And put that aside. If this power could make him stronger, perhaps he could escape his current predicament. And Herta answered very readily. Simulated universe, you should have a corresponding concept in your mind. Or rather, this is precisely mimicking the way you envision using it. When you first entered the stellar, among the cosmic concepts you saw, all the history and myths that ever occurred in the infinite universe were recorded. There are also many worlds you are familiar with. For example, even the star rail world you know well is possible. You can enter those conceptual universes as a consciousness through the simulated universe. By completing great deeds, forging your soul and will, empathizing with growth experiences, recreating accumulated years. Finally, the experience accumulated in the simulated test can be transformed into physical nourishment through some special means, conversion channels, allowing both your spirit and body to grow comprehensively. In other words, unlike in games, here, even after clearing the simulated universe and leaving it, your strength will increase. Many powers originally mastered in the simulated universe, after settlement, can also be used in reality. Of course. After all, it's not a real universe, just a conceptual entity. How much power you can bring out depends on you. Yi instantly understood what it meant. Combat skills, and even the training of muscle memory, things that can be learned, should be perfectly inherited. But artifacts snatched in the simulated universe, for example, couldn't be brought out, right? If the world he simulated was Britain in the age of myths, and he pulled out the sword in the stone, or even the holy sword later, before Arthur. The things obtained from the conceptual universe were not real objects. So it was normal that they couldn't be taken out. But even so, this method of becoming stronger was powerful enough. So I can also achieve overpowered stats outside the simulated universe. But that description you gave earlier, why does it sound so familiar? This is completely the method of Kenkatsu's cultivation, isn't it? The man, Kenkatsu, who grew from projection magecraft all the way to unlimited blade works, flashed through Yi's mind. Symbiotic growth experience, recreating accumulated years, good heavens. This is clearly the core of the trace on projection, noble phantasm. To forge his soul and body in the same way one forges imaginary noble phantasms. It works. This is very Kenkatsu. But that wasn't the point. The point was that in the future, Memes like, no matter how strong you are in the simulated universe, it's fake. The popular internet memes from before he transmigrated would no longer be able to defeat him. He was strong in the simulated universe. And he would be just as strong outside the simulated universe. Oh, that's how confident he was. Herta. The freedom of the simulated universe is very high. However, there are countless universes, and unless an anchor point is selected and recorded. Otherwise, I don't know which world you will travel to. A world that has been simulated once will be recorded, making it easy to find again later. But for now, you can only explore them one by one yourself. Sometimes, luck is also a very significant factor in becoming stronger. I hope you can find a suitable world to conquer. Because there is no fixed way to become stronger. As long as you grow in the simulated universe and become stronger, nothing else matters. Whether you follow history and embark on a heroic path alongside heroes, or change fate, and become a destruction stellarn or a world-destroying demon lord. Even if you like, it doesn't matter if you just play games in the simulated universe and live a decadent life. If you go to the Star Rail universe, you can even play a simulated universe within the simulated universe. Hehe, that should be a rather interesting scene. Yee, not interesting at all. You're doing Russian nesting dolls here. She said it was to help him quickly become stronger. So he could grow into a perfect container suitable for the stellarn. This AI consciousness was a bit too malicious, he felt it was a little scummy. She didn't persuade him to work hard to become stronger. She even told him he could just slack off in the simulated universe. As expected, it was a conscious entity created by that thing's, stellarn's, unconscious instinct. If it had even a little bit of self-awareness and wanted to save itself, it wouldn't create such an unreliable thing, right? Although their contact was short. This Herta's personality seemed to be a bit of a mischief maker. Herta, alright, no more jokes. Although there's no external interference. As long as you don't die. The seal on the stellarn is basically unbreakable. But even with a 1 in 10 million chance, I certainly don't want to perish with you as soon as I'm born. You should hurry up and start the simulated universe to get stronger. At the very least, you need to be strong enough that the external forces of this current world can't threaten you at all. Let me think. Just in case it's a world with gods and Buddhas everywhere, and a bunch of monsters and ghosts. Preliminary setting. It should be safe once you become strong enough to casually blow up a star. Yee. Casually blow up a star. Is this something a carbon-based life form could even conceive of? Even with the cheat of shared growth experience and accumulated years from the simulated universe. His data when he entered the simulated universe was only at the level of an ordinary person. At best, his mental will might be a bit stronger than an ordinary person's. And perhaps he had some undeveloped talents he wasn't yet aware of. But thinking of the worst-case scenario, Yi didn't have much expectation for that. For an ordinary human to grow to the point of casually blowing up a star. Even the demigod children and great heroes in Greek mythology, not many could be strong enough to casually blow up a star even at their peak. If he really waited until he reached that level, who knows how many years would have passed. This could hardly be considered a small goal. Yi asked Herta how to use the simulated universe, and after understanding the relevant information, he directly ignored this unreliable Herta. Yi prepared to try the simulated universe himself first. Compared to the distant and grand goal of blowing up a star, it was better to be more grounded now. I hope it's a world where I can change my current situation and quickly gain power. Then, Yi walked into the light gate. And then, his vision went black. His consciousness suddenly entered a calm, dark starry sky. In the darkness, countless stars twinkled. And a tremor of realization arose in Yi's mind. Those lights represented one cosmic concept after another. He instinctively moved towards the closest star point. Then that star point suddenly brightened, its light expanding. Until it transformed into a beautiful world. And at this moment, much information appeared in Yi's mind, along with the voice of the external, Herta. First simulated universe. Don't die too soon, okay. I still have some residual stellarn power here. Although it can't directly make you stronger. It can help you reshape your destiny once at a critical moment. Seize the opportunity, choose the right target, and you can contact me anytime through the transfer station. At that time, I will help you to be reborn. As the ethereal voice gradually faded away, Yi's consciousness completely sank into the simulated universe. When he regained consciousness, he had completely arrived in a strange world. Simulation start. Identity automatically converted. Random conversion successful. Time, 1193 BC. Location, a city in the southeast direction of the Hellespont Strait, western end of the Asia Minor Peninsula. Yi's consciousness slowly awakened, accompanied by the brief information and memories brought by his simulated identity in his mind. Yi quickly understood what kind of world he had arrived in. Heracles, the most famous great hero of ancient Greece, defeated Hippocoon, the king of Sparta, and killed all his sons. On the other side, Tyndareus, Hippocoon's brother who had been driven away, returned to Sparta with a foreign princess and became the new king of Sparta. Princess Leda bore him 4 children. But 2 of them had no blood relation to him. This brings us to the greatest denouement of the entire Greek mythology world, the god King Zeus. Undoubtedly, this was another one of the god king's escapades, seducing mortals and cuckolding the king of Sparta, sowing his seeds. And one of those 2 children, a girl, was Helen, one of the most famous beautiful women of Greece. If one were to ask who was the most beautiful among the ancient Greek gods, noble goddesses like Hera, goddess Athena, even Aphrodite, famous for being the Aphrodite, and Artemis, the goddess of the moon. And so on. There are countless goddesses renowned for their beauty, making it hard to judge who is superior. But if one were to ask who was the most beautiful among humans, before her, there was Pandora, the witch blessed by the gods, who brought calamity to the world. After her, there was Helen, who, by herself, caused a famous war in which many Greek heroes participated. She absolutely deserves to be nominated as the most beautiful woman in Greece. Famous for her beauty, stirring up the entire world. And that war was the famous Trojan War. Helen, whose beauty surpassed all of Greece. Even Theseus, the hero of the Attica Peninsula, once tried to abduct her. Her suitors trampled the threshold of the king of Sparta. Even Odysseus, one of the few wise men and a born leader among the many Greek heroes, was one of her many admirers. When suitors came one after another, leading to internal strife and conflict, leaving King Tyndareus of Sparta at a loss, the astute suitor Odysseus advised Tyndareus, "Let's decide who marries Helen by throwing a ring, and make all suitors swear that they will never take up arms against Helen's husband and will fully assist him if he needs help." After all suitors agreed, the leaders of the Aegean Sea who came to propose marriage chose Menelaus, the handsome son of Atreus, by throwing a ring. After Tyndareus died, Menelaus became the king of Sparta. The story should have ended here. Just another legend of a hero winning the beauty. But then, the 3 goddesses Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, in order to contend for a golden apple inscribed, "To the fairest goddess, at the gods' banquet," asked Paris, the son of the king of Troy, to be the judge. And each promised power, wisdom, and the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen, as bargaining chips to tempt him. And Paris could not resist the temptation of beauty, choosing Aphrodite, the Aphrodite, who offered Helen as a reward. This also led to Paris's subsequent visit to Sparta, where, with the help of Aphrodite's enchantment, he abducted Helen and stole a large amount of treasure. This infuriated the king of Sparta upon his return, serving as the fuse, igniting the famous Trojan War. And the location where Yi was at this moment was precisely the city of Troy. His identity was merely one of the many Trojan commoners, who had recently been forcibly conscripted into the army due to the impending Great War, a battlefield where heroes would clash, joining the defensive army resisting the large army composed of Achilles and other Greek heroes. Yi. In this vast war, he had joined not the ultimately victorious side, but the side of Troy, which was destined to fail. Not to mention that he might soon face the invulnerable great hero Achilles. What kind of jinx is Herta? He wouldn't really lose his life in this first simulated universe so quickly, would he? But, thinking of the many famous heroes who would appear in this war, Yi recalled Herta's voice heard at the last moment before the simulated universe began. A chance to reshape destiny. It sounded a bit mystical. So to put it in simpler terms, it was an opportunity to acquire the template of a hero he had come into contact with. inheriting that hero's talents, skills, and conceptual weapons, be they noble phantasms, divine artifacts, or martial weapons. Completely transforming a hero's growth and achievements into his own nourishment. Sharing growth experience, accumulating years. The template's power wouldn't directly grant him the hero's peak strength. But it would fundamentally change his talents from soul to body, allowing him to grow rapidly until he reached the same level as that hero, and finally, surpassed him. If, on this vast, star-studded stage where numerous heroes appear, in this Trojan War, which hero's destiny template is most worth acquiring? Then without a doubt, it is the strongest one. Achilles, who became famous for this battle. Though defeated, still glorious, Achilles. When Yi first learned about this powerful initial gift pack and cheat, his heart was shaken. After confirming the time, place, and his identity in this simulated universe, and the major events he was about to face, he immediately set his target. This was both a stroke of luck and misfortune. His first simulated universe brought him to ancient Greece, a time with clear Greek mythology. Moreover, he would soon encounter powerful heroes on the battlefield, giving him a chance to acquire hero templates. If he had been simulated into an everyday world, or even an era of peace and quiet with almost no major events, Yi might have had to continue exploring the vast universe, searching for a suitable simulated universe. Hitting the jackpot on his first try was truly the favor of the goddess of luck. However, joining such a dangerous war meant that, let alone encountering Achilles, he might be killed by other common soldiers before even seeing him. The start was a hell-level war like this, without even a simple transitional instances. No time for him to learn skills or strengthen himself. But Yi did not choose to retreat. In the vast, endless universe, there might be universes with much, much better starts than this one. Hero templates even more powerful than Achilles were everywhere. Even those who grew to surpass Greek god as humans were not few. However, compared to those powerful worlds, more common were ordinary mortal worlds or overly dangerous divine and demonic worlds. Sifting through them aimlessly like this would be a complete waste of time. And with his current strength, it would be very difficult to come into contact with those powerful heroes. Rather than being picky, it was better to quickly seize a good template, rapidly grow stronger, and overcome the immediate crisis. As long as he survived the difficult early development period. Later, with the accumulation of the simulated universe, he would have plenty of time to grow and become stronger. Templates were just for a faster transition through the early weakness. Infinite worlds and infinite growth were his distant future promising. Yi was very self-aware of this, knowing what he needed most at the moment. The current timeline was precisely when Odysseus and others, upon hearing that Helen had been taken. These former admirers and suitors of Helen, gathered by King of Sparta's brother, King Agamemnon of Mycenae, came to jointly attack Paris, according to the oath they had made. They had promised never to harm Helen's husband and to jointly aid and protect this sacred marriage. These powerful heroes came menacingly, gathering at Aulis, with an army of 100,000 and 1,186 ships. The overwhelming momentum dyed the coastline a dark, oppressive, heavy color. Under the dark clouds, the two armies engaged in fierce combat outside the city of Troy. The prophet foretold that the first person to step on the shore of Troy would die. Odysseus threw his shield to the ground and stepped ashore. The hero Protesilaus, eager to achieve military glory, did not notice Odysseus's trick and was fooled. He immediately jumped ashore to kill the enemy, but was pierced by a long spear thrown by the Trojan defender, Hector, ending his life. Subsequently, the Trojan army, ambushed there, engaged in battle with the many Greek heroes led by Agamemnon. Among them, the great hero Achilles displayed an unstoppable force on the battlefield for the first time. Although he was only just starting out, he had already reached his peak. He was like a god spear, or a meteor, piercing through the battlefield, slaughtering through the enemy ranks as if entering an unmanned territory, reaping a large amount of warriors' blood on the battlefield like mowing grass. Finally, in this first battle, the Trojan side was utterly defeated and fled back to the city. Fortunately, Yi did not participate in this dangerous first engagement on the battlefield. From a distance, located in the rear, it was the first time he witnessed Achilles' appearance. The strength he displayed greatly shocked Yi. Achilles was like a future cutting-edge weapon that had mistakenly entered the cold weapon era. The long spear in his hand, given by Poseidon to his parents during their marriage, was a genuine divine weapon. Just a light touch from that long spear. The heads of the Trojan soldiers would explode like tofu curd. Their flesh and blood bodies could not stop it in the slightest. Even the ground was easily torn apart by its sharpness. The thrown spear could turn into a meteor-like bombardment, plowing the earth on the battlefield. This scene also made Yi even more certain. The world he chose for his first simulated universe should be a Greek mythology world with the presence of Greek god, not a mere historical world. Could Achilles in an ordinary historical world have such combat power? Should one say, as expected of a demigod? And this powerful strength, moving freely among 10,000 troops. And that powerful, simple, and crude stance of not dodging even when swords and blades struck him, were deeply reflected in Yi's eyes. A body of steel and powerful martial arts. Was there a better gift package for a novice who knew nothing in the early stages? An invincible body of steel could increase his survival rate and fault tolerance. While that powerful martial art was a solid increase in combat power. But how to approach that son of a demigod? Let alone getting close to Achilles. Just breaking through the layers of danger on the battlefield to reach Achilles was extremely difficult. Yi frowned. And time reached 12:21 a.m. No matter how Yi thought or planned. The battlefield was constantly changing and would not wait for him to act step by step according to his ideas. Soon, another war broke out. This time, after realizing the strength of the rising hero Achilles. Hector, who excelled in defense, no longer advanced rashly. Instead, he led his soldiers to firmly defend Troy. Under his impenetrable defensive tactics, or rather, unscrupulous tactics. Flaming oil, feces, anything that could be used as a weapon was employed. Even Achilles became temporarily constrained. The unprecedented decisive battle fell into a stalemate. No, it should be called a war of annihilation. This war turned into a prolonged conflict of mutual attrition, shifting from breaking through Troy to trying every unscrupulous method to annihilate the enemy. On one side was an overwhelming all-star Greek heroes lineup. On the other side was the seemingly isolated and helpless city of Troy. Almost everyone thought that under the leadership of the powerful Achilles and others, the city should not last long before being breached. However, only Yi understood. This war would last for 10 years before ending. And even during this time, even the invincible Achilles would die in this campaign. The seemingly isolated and helpless Troy, under Hector's impenetrable defensive tactics, was actually as stable as a mountain. But this did not mean the war was not fierce. The hundreds of thousands of troops surrounding Troy slowly tightened their encirclement. And during this process, many other countries and allied countries were actually continuously drawn into it. Although there were no cutting-edge forces strong enough to change the tide of the war, there was no shortage of ordinary cannon fodder, constantly pouring into this largest meat grinder battlefield of ancient Greece. Everyone was already deeply entrenched, their eyes red with battle lust. It was already impossible to escape alive from here. Only by completely annihilating one side, and achieving victory, was there this one path. And by this point in the battle, it was no longer simply about contending for a woman, Helen. Instead, it had become a war of dignity, honor, and hatred. A rhapsody of wails, shouts, roars, and explosions played out incessantly and mercilessly. Human walls were completely destroyed. And quickly plugged with new flesh and blood. The living were slaughtered. Slaughtered, no distinction between old and young, kill without mercy, in order to eradicate all enemies in sight. Even the heroes fell into madness. Justice, revenge, love, plunder, suppression, liberation, the reason for their expedition no longer mattered. As long as people held righteousness, they would become incredibly ferocious. Such situations were happening everywhere. Yes, for example. Boom. Siege boulders rained down, shattering a section of the city wall and many soldiers who had been reduced to bloody pulp. Over here. Enemies are climbing through the breach. Some Troy soldiers filled the gap and went forward to fight. Their feet stepped in a blur of flesh, and they could no longer afford to feel nauseous. They had to face the fierce enemy troops who had already climbed onto the city wall. Ah! Hector, the overall commander of the defending forces, gritted his teeth. He wanted to disperse some troops to repair the shattered city wall there. But compared to those ordinary enemy troops, he needed even more troops to suppress those true monsters. For example, that invulnerable hero, Achilles. What a monstrous guy. It's practically cheating. Although he was skilled at using anything as a weapon and leading soldiers to defend against invaders. But when he encountered that kind of crude, stubborn brute who was immune to most weapons and seemed made of steel, it was like encountering a natural nemesis. Prolonged defense was bound to lead to loss. He needed to find an opportunity, to find that man's weakness, and resolve this huge threat. If it were a direct confrontation, Troy would probably have been completely annihilated long ago, wiped out by this demigod. Even now, they could barely hold on. It was all thanks to these walls filled with divine protection. That's right. Troy, protected by divine power. If it were an ordinary city wall, in front of Achilles' divine spear, it would be no stronger than the skulls of human enemy troops that he pierced and shattered. No matter how majestic a mighty pass, in front of a truly powerful hero, it was no different from a shoddy project. But in this world, gods existed. And the Trojan War itself had multiple gods playing games behind it. At the same time, boom, throwing a basin of flames burning at over several thousand degrees from the city wall. Although he didn't know how such a thing could appear in ancient Greece with its low technological level, he watched as the fierce flames, capable of melting modern armored vehicles, exploded among the dense crowd below. For a moment, a huge explosion occurred. But there was no time for him to think. Once the war began, it was even more chaotic than imagined, and one could lose their life if they weren't careful. Even Hector himself personally entered the fray and killed many soldiers. Although he did not possess the divine power of a demigod hero, he had astonishing spear and sword skills, with exquisite dual mastery of sword and spear, and a tough physique. It could be said that apart from not having an invulnerable steel body, he was essentially playing a mini Achilles script. Often, when the defense line was on the verge of collapsing, he would lead his soldiers to push the enemy back. This was war, no extraneous thoughts could be entertained. And this battle only temporarily ended after the second sunset. The exhausted warring parties withdrew their troops and began a brief rest to recover their energy. And Hector, who was also incredibly fatigued, only then had time to relax his tense mind. And continue to ponder how to deal with Achilles, this major headache. On the other side, Yi was also incredibly tired, leaning against the city wall, his eyes bloodshot. After a day and night of fighting, he hadn't closed his eyes, and most of the soldiers present were in the same situation. The real battlefield was even more chaotic than imagined. Unless one's individual strength reached a certain level. Otherwise, like a raindrop falling into a pond, it wouldn't create larger ripples and would quickly vanish. The power of an individual seemed so insignificant in the torrent of this battlefield. And thus, even Yi, who was not skilled in martial arts, following Hector's command, he and the other soldiers could engage the enemy troops back and forth. He even fought an enemy soldier who climbed the city wall head-on today. Taking advantage of the enemy's attention being drawn by his teammate, he slashed his sword across the enemy's neck. But he didn't kill the person, he only cut into the major artery. A large amount of blood sprayed from the enemy's body, and he struggled with a distorted expression. The enemy's unwilling, resentful gaze seemed still vivid in his memory. Finally, he suffered so much that he couldn't die immediately. It was another Troy soldier nearby who finished him off, ending the tragic process. And unexpectedly, Yi's face was very pale at this time. Mostly due to excessive physical exertion, but his mind did not suffer too much from the after effects of killing. His physical strength was exhausted, but his mind was incredibly calm and resilient. Through the tempering of this battlefield slaughter, he seemed to have gained new vitality. A familiar feeling, Yi thought. It was the same when he struggled to survive in the desert before. After experiencing despair, his mind gradually became resilient and entered a strange state of stability, allowing him not to feel dazed by anything anymore. An iron will. At this moment, Yi thought of such words. It was almost like a fixed mental enhancement buff. In this state, it even made him feel only an initial shock when he first killed. But very quickly, let alone nausea and guilt. In the state of forced calmness. As he became aware of more dangers, his body instinctively reacted and plunged into the next battle. It was precisely this stable mind, almost comparable to the instincts of those legendary heroes, that allowed Yi to fight through this perilous war without major incident until the end. Otherwise, as an ordinary person who was not a hero, how could he have such good fortune to fight until now without a single injury? Many of the soldiers who defended the city with him died, and even those who survived were mostly wounded or crippled, and were transferred to the rear to recover. He, however, was one of the few who emerged from the great battle completely unharmed. Intense fatigue surged into his heart. Although there were no physical injuries, his mental energy was consumed even more. A whole day of high-load operation and vigilant mental power. Anyone would be overwhelmed. Yi, who fell asleep unknowingly, didn't sleep for long before he was awakened by the miserable groans of pain in his ears. He looked around, and for a moment, it felt like a lifetime had passed. It was clearly just a simulated universe. But it felt as if he had truly transmigrated again. When he came to his senses, looking at the messy surroundings, with wounded everywhere, and the sky gradually darkening, he didn't know when the Greek army would attack again. Yi, I can't just sit here and wait to die anymore. Heaven knew how long it would take to get in contact with Achilles if he continued like this. This war would last for 10 whole years. He didn't have time to wait slowly. He had to accelerate the progress of this battle. At the very least, he needed to hasten the arrival of the Achilles heel ending. And staying to defend the city would absolutely prevent him from coming into contact with that great hero of ancient Greece. He had to risk joining the war where he would directly confront him. Yi's mind began to think and operate rapidly. It seemed that through his already powerful and resilient mental strength, in addition to absolute calm judgment, Yi's memory was also enhanced. All sorts of information about the Trojan War in Greek mythology from before his transmigration became incredibly clear in his mind at this moment. He even remembered the timeline very clearly. For a moment, he really found a piece of information that was clearly recorded about a direct encounter with Achilles. And this timing is very soon. According to records, after the Greek heroes first landed on the island and repelled the ambushing Hector, the two sides continued fighting until the next day. The fighting would then briefly stop for them to collect bodies and bury the warriors. Afterward, the Greek allied forces would drag their ships ashore and set up camp nearby. The more powerful Achilles and the more defensive great Ajax would guard the outermost flanks. The tents of King Agamemnon, as the leader, and Odysseus, as the military commander, would be in the center to command the entire army and also be protected by it. Then, the Greek side would send someone to negotiate peace. Naturally, the outcome of this negotiation would not be smooth. It was precisely this negotiation that led the enraged Greek side to launch a full-scale assault. After failing to conquer Troy for a long time, with 3 consecutive siege failures, they would eventually shift their target to other city-states surrounding Troy. These included Tenedos, Lesbos, Pedasus, Lernazius, among others. Among them, Thebes in Boeotia was also occupied. This city was governed by Aetion, the father of Hector's wife, Andromache. And the one who led the army to conquer this city was the great hero Achilles. Within a day of conquering the city, he killed 7 of Andromache's brothers, Hector's wife, and captured Chryses and Briseis, the 2 daughters of the sun god's priest, Chryses. Chryses was given to King Agamemnon of Mycenae. This is a battle in which Achilles is clearly recorded to have participated. Although the result was a defeat, even the daughter of a divine priest was defiled. The ending was incredibly dark. But Knight's main purpose was to make contact with that Achilles, and even engage in battle. This was something that would inevitably happen the moment he met him, given his current identity. To encounter Achilles head-on and not die. The chances of surviving are no simpler than getting 10 golds in a 10 pull in a gacha game. In other words, the result isn't important, what's important is the process. As long as I can make contact with Achilles after the battle, whether I successfully survive or die under that divine spear, it doesn't matter to me. Knight pondered, a cold glint flashing in his calm eyes. What he needed was always clear from beginning to end, to maximize the profit from this war. Achilles' destiny, hero template. Even if he dies afterward, it's just the end of the simulated universe test. If he's unwilling, he can always start over from scratch later. There will always be an opportunity to conquer this universe. He doesn't have time to spend 10 years here with the Greek allied forces. With that effort, wouldn't it be better to get the template early and then go to other simulated universes to become stronger? On this battlefield named the Trojan War. Apart from the meat grinder of madness and slaughter, there are no other opportunities to be found. Nor is it a good place to settle down, train, or learn skills. Perhaps it can increase some combat experience and temper one's mind, which are among the few benefits. And just as Knight was thinking, the Greek and Troy sides began to collect the bodies on the battlefield. Despite having prepared an ambush, they didn't expect the casualties to still be so heavy. When he saw the piled-up corpses of soldiers being cremated, especially the bodies searched outside the city, which were several times more numerous than those who died defending the city, Hector, as the defense leader of Troy, felt incredibly heavy-hearted. Hector, it seems we can't go out and fight skirmishes for a short time before finding a way to defeat that Achilles. No one is a match for that guy in open combat outside the city. What a terrifying enemy. We can only rely on the city walls built by the sun god Apollo and the sea god Poseidon to barely hold back the Greek allied forces. Hector's mood was heavy, but he remained relatively calm. It is said that the city walls of Troy were jointly built with divine power by Apollo, the god of light among the 12 main gods of Greece, and Poseidon, the sea god, which is also why Achilles, as a son of a demigod, could not possibly destroy them head-on. Knight's earlier thought was correct. The city of Troy indeed had the divine power of the gods protecting it. Or rather, on the surface, this war seemed to be just between the Greek allied forces and Troy. But in reality, it was still a game between gods. The wall of Troy was indeed very tall and sturdy, giving a full sense of security. However, even relying on the power of the city walls, while it could defend against the heroes' assaults, it still required a large number of soldiers to hold against enemy troops wanting to scale the walls. To be honest, Hector was not very keen on continuing this war. The enemy was far stronger than imagined. Even with a god-made wall, it could only protect them but could not continue to help them eliminate the enemy after they left the city. At this time, although Hector found it troublesome, he had not yet realized the seriousness of the situation. He was still thinking of relying on the defensive power of the Troy city walls, waiting for an opportunity for a desperate counterattack. However, on the other side, if Knight had heard his thoughts, he would certainly have told him how difficult it would be for that opportunity to arrive. In order to find the weakness of Achilles, the foremost warrior of the Greek side, Hector would even sacrifice himself in the future. One can imagine how difficult that desperate counterattack opportunity would be and how profound the cost, otherwise the war would not have been dragged out for 10 years. And Knight understood just how luxurious the enemy's lineup was, knowing more information than Hector. Therefore, he had no hope that old Hector could solo Achilles with him. He had also considered using his understanding of the historical trajectory of mythology to leave behind great achievements and complete a grand undertaking in the simulated universe. The method of how to use the simulated universe to become stronger was already clearly explained before. If he could leave a name for himself on this battlefield of gathered heroes in Troy, he would certainly gain immense rewards. And as his natural stance in this simulated universe's identity faction, he absolutely could not stand with the Greek faction, which would ultimately win. He could only stand with Troy and fight to the death against legendary heroes like Achilles and Odysseus. However, just a slight understanding of how luxurious the enemy's lineup would reveal how difficult this operation would be. The allied forces formed by the suitors of Helen, the most beautiful woman in ancient Greece, encompassed most of Greece's power, including numerous kingdoms, and even kings personally leading their armies. Besides Menelaus, the king of Sparta, whose wife was taken, leaving him with a green hat. His brother, Agamemnon, was the king of Mycenae, and also the leader of this allied force, seeking justice for his brother. And the commander of the allied forces, Odysseus, was the king of the island of Ithaca in western Greece. The father of the great hero Achilles, on the other hand, was the king of Phthia in Thessaly, and also a descendant of Zeus. Therefore, Achilles was definitely born a prince, and with his mother being a sea nymph, he possessed noble demigod blood. counting the key figures and commanders of the Greek allied forces. They were basically kings, or future kings, and some even demigods. With such a luxurious lineup, even if the Greek allied forces were temporarily held back, or even annihilated, as long as they couldn't be completely wiped out in one go. Once those kings returned to their own lands, they could raise another army and come back. This lineup, how can one possibly win? If his strength were just a billion bit stronger, there might still be some hope. But now, the time has come to the second day. Contrary to what is recorded in mythical history, the peace delegation from the Greek allied forces did not arrive immediately after the war ended yesterday. After a day of rest and cremating the bodies of the fallen soldiers, Hector redeployed the defense troops within the city of Troy. Due to his outstanding performance on the battlefield previously, and having gone through a day and night of brutal fighting completely unharmed, Hector noticed you, Knight. Hector, seeing you as a promising talent, extended an olive branch of recruitment to you. This was an unexpected bonus. He had originally intended to find a way to leave Troy and go to other battlefields by contacting his superior. You readily accepted the recruitment offer from this highest-ranking commander. Subsequently, you followed Hector, temporarily serving as a personal guard. He hadn't expected to be noticed and recruited by Hector. And this also gave Yi an opportunity. If he could persuade Hector to send troops to rescue the surrounding cities, then he would also have the chance to openly go to the battlefield where Achilles was located. And just as Yi was thinking about how to phrase his words and find an opportunity to persuade Hector, on the other side, the Greek allied forces peace representatives finally arrived. The arrivals were none other than Menelaus, the king of Sparta, who was the biggest cuckold in Greece with a verdant prairie on his head, and Odysseus, the military commander of the Greek allied forces. The victim actually came to their doorstep himself. Although it was recorded in myths, seeing two individuals of such noble status among the enemy's high-ranking officials actually coming alone to Troy to negotiate, Yi was still quite moved. If this were on the battlefield back in their homeland, being so naive would surely get them severely taught a lesson. They needed a few more lessons to understand the wickedness of society. Should he say they were bold, or confident enough? Were they relying on the powerful Greek allied forces, not worrying that Troy would dare to turn hostile? Even if they didn't die, they'd at least lose a layer of skin. Yi followed Hector to the negotiation site. At this time, on the Greek side, Odysseus and others were demanding that the Trojans return the treasures and Helen with a very strong attitude. Facing the aggressive Greek allied forces, the high-ranking Trojans, knowing they were in the wrong, immediately began to discuss amongst themselves. None of them wanted to offend the powerful Greek allied forces. For a time, the Trojan side showed signs of being inclined to agree to the other party's demands. But just then, the main instigator of all these events, Paris, finally arrived. When he heard the demands from the Greek side, Paris said, "I disagree. The goddess Aphrodite has already bestowed Helen upon me, and those treasures are merely the dowry Helen brought back. They all belong to my private property. You have no right to take my private property and give it to others. Moreover, these foreign invaders have killed many of our soldiers. We must not let these barbaric Greeks succeed in their conspiracy." As soon as the young Prince Paris spoke, Hector, his elder brother, who had originally intended to cease hostilities, immediately softened and extinguished that thought. That's right, Hector was Paris's elder brother. He was not only the supreme commander of Troy's city defenses but also Troy's eldest prince, and furthermore, Troy's foremost hero. This bravest, fiercest, and most unyielding hero of Troy on the battlefield was not afraid of trouble. Hector, who had originally been unwilling to let Troy face these powerful enemies, changed his mind after hearing Paris's thoughts. Because of his younger brother Paris's unfortunate past experiences, Hector greatly cherished his younger brother and felt pity for him. This brings us to the legend of Paris. As the youngest son of Priam, the old king of Troy, and Queen Hecuba, when Paris was born, his mother had a dream. She dreamt that this child would turn into a bundle of fire and burn down the entire palace. The queen told this dream to the prophet, who foretold that this child would bring ruin and misfortune to Troy in the future. Because of this prophecy, Paris was almost executed right after he was born. Ultimately, a slave, who was supposed to be his executioner, felt compassion and secretly abandoned Paris in the forest. Upon returning, the slave lied, claiming to have killed Paris. In the forest, a shepherd found Paris, still in his swaddling clothes, and raised him. As an adult, Paris had a gentle disposition like a nymph and was skilled at playing the lyre. His talent even led people to mistakenly believe that his music was taught by Apollo. As the god of light, Apollo was also the god of music, and his skills were naturally beyond words. To be mistaken for a disciple of the god of music, one can imagine how beautiful the songs Paris played were. At the same time, he was also very handsome and possessed strength far beyond that of ordinary people. Even wolf packs dared not approach him. Because of his presence, the shepherds were very safe while tending their flocks, and thus they all sang praises of his abilities and deeds, calling him Alexandros, which means helper. When he returned to Troy with his good reputation and handsome appearance, and was recognized by the queen, who had felt guilty for many years, his parents did not kill him but happily restored his status as a prince. They completely forgot the prophecy from back then. Perhaps they believed that such a gentle, kind, and widely renowned child would not commit any major mistakes, let alone cause the downfall of Troy. They thought such a prophecy must have been mistaken. However, facts prove that Paris did indeed bring misfortune to Troy. But due to his past experiences, Hector actually felt a hint of guilt towards this younger brother who had never experienced parental love since childhood. And so, when his other brothers began to successively support Paris, he did not speak further. And his non-committal stance was already the greatest support for Paris. As Troy's foremost warrior, Hector's influence was still very high. Without his interference, Paris's influence, also as a prince, was highly regarded by the Trojans. The support of some brothers, combined with Antimachus, who had been bribed by Paris in advance, quickly led more people to side with Paris. At this point, Paris even demanded that Menelaus be immediately arrested and executed. Rivals seeing each other made their eyes bloodshot. Although Paris was the one who had cuckolded the king of Sparta, even absconding not only with the victim's wife but also with a large amount of treasure. Having committed such evil deeds, he could still righteously demand to kill someone else. Witnessing all of this, the young prince of Troy, though handsome, did not have a gentle personality as rumored. No, actually, the rumors of Paris being gentle and helpful were mostly spontaneous praises from the shepherds. This was largely thanks to Paris's presence. As a hero, his strength kept bandits and wolf packs from daring to approach. The shepherds unknowingly benefited from him, leading to their spontaneous praises. The ultimate intention, whether there was a desire to protect others, completely fails to stand up to scrutiny. And Paris did not accomplish any other great deeds. The only major event that shook all of Greece was stealing someone else's wife. Such a person could even be called a hero. The bar for heroes in Greece was surprisingly low. Heroes didn't need to do great good deeds, it seemed that as long as they displayed considerable bravery and powerful strength, they would be spontaneously called heroes by countless people and revered. They only sought the protection of his great power. Killing enemies on the battlefield is their great achievement. Solely from the perspective of their own country, perhaps they truly are heroes. But in terms of private morality, many of their actions are truly unacceptable. However, that has nothing to do with Ye. Paris, at the negotiation meeting, made outrageous statements, not concealing his hostility and killing intent, which made Odysseus and others nervous, and the atmosphere fell to a freezing point. The Troy prophet Helenus was bribed by Paris in advance, and he even more encouragingly declared that the gods would grant Troy victory, which became the final straw that broke the Trojans' psychological balance. The Trojans, who had gained much confidence in this battle, ultimately rejected the peace talks, but they did not capture and kill the two as Paris demanded, instead releasing them. At the negotiation meeting, you witnessed the ugly side of the heroes. In your opinion, these so-called heroes are more like bandits. For an unjust war, countless Greeks and Trojans had to pay with their lives. Having personally witnessed the cruelty of war, you feel pity for the upcoming decade-long hell battle, and for the countless ordinary people who are about to enter Troy, the largest meat grinder of the ancient era. But you cannot change any of this. And after returning to the main camp, Odysseus and his companion immediately angrily exaggerated all the threats and humiliations they had suffered during the negotiations in Troy, telling their companions. The Greeks were furious upon hearing this, determined to severely punish these shameless Trojans. They began to organize their army for a strong assault. Under Hector's leadership, you rejoined the defensive line. In a flash, several more days passed in the simulated universe world. During this time, Yi experienced many battles, and even when he was by Hector's side, his powerful spiritual energy, while occasionally observing Hector's heroic combat, subconsciously learned a few moves. Although it was just simple imitation, it unknowingly increased Yi's combat power significantly. Combined with that powerful spiritual energy, almost like intuition, Yi, with only minor injuries, managed to repel the enemy 3 times with Hector, successfully defending Troy city without incident. Several consecutive strong assaults left both the soldiers and Hector mentally exhausted. But they dared not relax their vigilance. To prevent a 4th attack that might come at any time, Hector led the soldiers, enduring fatigue, to take turns on night watch. According to the information in his memory, Yi knew that the previous attack was likely the last wave of Greek siege in the short term. If it followed the original history, the Greeks, upon discovering that Troy city was easy to defend and difficult to attack, would temporarily give up on this tough nut to crack and first focus on the surrounding smaller cities. Knowing he could no longer delay, Yi sought out Hector. You've done well these past few days, Yi. You already possess the potential to become a powerful warrior. I've noticed that you seem to be intentionally imitating my fighting style. But you can't learn much true skill just by watching. After the war ends, if you survive, I can teach you how to truly wield your weapon. Facing Yi's arrival, Hector spoke first before Yi even had a chance to open his mouth. He looked at Yi with an appreciative gaze. Because of Yi's calmness on the battlefield during this period, and his eagerness to learn and rapid growth in battle, Hector, who had unintentionally noticed these moments, developed a fondness for his talent. Although he hadn't yet reached the potential to become a hero, compared to most ordinary soldiers, Yi's performance was already very impressive. I apologize for being discovered by you. Because your heroic combat, Lord Hector, was too captivating, when I came to my senses, I had already subconsciously imitated your fighting without realizing it. Thank you very much for your kindness. I am truly honored and humbled. I am so happy that I will have the opportunity to be personally instructed by your Royal Highness in the future. Yi reacted quickly to Hector's words. Upon being discovered for secretly learning, he showed no panic, but instead a slight smile. It seemed Hector had a very good impression of him, so it might be easier for him to achieve his goal next. This was a good thing. However, let's set aside the matter of learning martial arts for now. I have some very important intelligence that I'd like you to review, Yi said solemnly. Seeing Yi's serious attitude, Hector immediately became serious as well, his gaze turning stern. What intelligence? It's about some information concerning those Greeks. Then Yi stated that, out of interest, he had learned some stories about the heroes in Greece from many merchants who came from across the ocean. Therefore, he had heard a lot of intelligence. He wasn't sure if it was true before, but upon seeing Odysseus and others and hearing their familiar names, he confirmed that those messages might be true. Then, Yi told Hector the information about which countries' kings were the leaders of the major enemy factions. He also emphasized what kind of power each hero specialized in, noting that when they cooperated, they had almost no weaknesses. He also informed Hector that these brutal kings, having traveled thousands of miles, harbored a very strong desire for revenge. When they had previously landed in Mysia, these Greeks even mistakenly thought it was Troy and directly attacked the city, almost killing King Telephus there. And absurdly, this king was originally a Greek, even the son of the great hero Heracles. They only discovered their mistake when both sides temporarily stopped fighting and began peace talks. Furthermore, among the Greek allied forces, there were 3 princes who were related to this king. Their ferocity and hatred for Troy were imaginable, as they launched an invasion without even confirming the enemy's identity. Yi, compared to Troy city, which is protected by Lord Hector, I am now somewhat worried that if the Greeks cannot break through after a long siege, they might shift their target to other surrounding cities. Hector immediately couldn't sit still upon hearing this. What? And Yi didn't lie to him. In the Trojan War, Besides the famous story of the Achilles heel, the most famous part was at the beginning, when the Greeks famously attacked their own allies by mistake. If the son of Hercules hadn't inherited his father's excellent and powerful bloodline, his country would probably have been destroyed long ago. The Greeks, who had traveled thousands of miles, encountered storms and tsunamis along the way, even attacking the wrong enemy and mistakenly killing the sacred deer of the moon goddess Artemis. If they hadn't made a sacrifice to the goddess at the last moment, allowing Agamemnon's daughter to go to heaven to accompany Artemis, the Greeks wouldn't even have touched the gates of Troy. Having sacrificed so much, Greece, with a do-or-die attitude, would absolutely not return if they couldn't get what they wanted. On the other side, he quickly realized the seriousness of the situation. He had already heard ye report the names of Odysseus, Agamemnon, and a series of other kings. Hector's expression had shifted repeatedly upon hearing the lavish list of kings, a lineup that could truly be called a gathering of monarchs. When he heard Knight's conjecture that the Greek allied forces might launch a surprise attack on other surrounding cities, his face instantly grew even uglier. He clenched his fists, his mood becoming heavy. Information transmission was extremely limited in this era. Because of this, there were even incidents like the Greek allied forces mistakenly attacking their own allies, as had happened before. Therefore, although he knew the Greek allied forces were powerful and included many formidable heroes, Hector didn't have a clear concept of the true extent of the background and power represented by those heroes. Compared to their titles as kings, their reputations as heroes were more widely known. After all, Greece was vast, and there were simply too many countries. Hector couldn't possibly know every king of every tiny, insignificant nation. While he knew that the most beautiful woman in Greece, Helen, had many suitors, he never expected that every single one of them would be a king. Paris had truly brought back an incredible ticking time bomb for them. He had truly screwed over his brother, one might say. At this moment, Hector was silent, feeling some regret in his heart, regretting that he hadn't stopped Paris back then. Perhaps he should have let Odysseus and the others take Helen away. Although that woman had followed his brother to Troy because of love. She wasn't doing well here. Due to her special status. Although King Priam protected the couple like a father. Once disputes arose between Paris and his brothers, as they argued, someone would inevitably take their anger out on Helen and scold her. In everyone's eyes, it was because of Helen that Paris had offended the king of Sparta, committing the reprehensible act of eloping with another man's wife. So, everyone liked to blame that woman, calling her a femme fatale, believing Helen was a symbol of disaster. It was her promiscuity that caused Paris to bear such a stigma. Just as hateful as the witch Pandora of old. Although there was no shortage of jealousy and greed among some people who, if they couldn't have something, wanted to destroy it. Facing this malice, usually, only Hector was willing to step forward, speak up for her, calm his brother's anger, and help her out of difficult situations. He protected his younger brother and his wife like an older brother. He was also the only one who had never spoken ill of her, which Helen was quite grateful for, often coming to him to cry. As one of the few heroes in Troy, and even in Greece, with a relatively noble and just character, he saw all the suffering Helen endured here. You were right, Knight. The Greeks have been unable to conquer us for so long. With their brutality, they might vent their anger and resentment on other small cities nearby. Hector said. I truly want to save them. But I'm afraid I cannot. Thank you for letting me know how powerful the enemy's forces truly are. Facing the multinational Greek allied forces, we only have hope of victory by holding our ground here in Troy. After a moment of calm reflection, Hector's heart bled, feeling sorrow for the innocent people in other cities who were about to be implicated and possibly annihilated. However, his excellent strategic acumen made him realize that now was absolutely not the time to send troops out to support them. The Greek allied forces, formed by multiple kings. The enemy's combat strength might be far greater than what was currently apparent. The nations behind those kings were their largest source of troops and reinforcements. In comparison, to attempt a full-line defense with the strength of Troy alone would be nothing short of a dream. Is that so? If I remember correctly, Lord Hector, your wife's family is in Thebes of Boeotia, isn't it? Knight's words made Hector's expression change. Andromache was Hector's wife, and her father was the ruler of the city of Thebes. Of course, this Thebes was not the Thebes. There was also a Thebes in Greece, which was a powerful nation, the birthplace of the hero Oedipus's legend, and the prototype of the seven-gated walls legend. Later, in this Trojan War, the first hero Hector would encounter who would cause his spear to fail, Ajax's shield, whose defense was sufficient to withstand a shield equivalent to the thickness of 7 city walls, also originated from this. The prototype of a certain world's noble phantasm, Rhoias. And the Thebes Knight was referring to now was just one of the many city-states surrounding Troy. At this moment, facing the powerful Greek allied forces, let alone this Thebes, even the Thebes in central Greece, guarded by 7 walls, might not be able to stop this group of hungry jackals and beasts. Troy's builders were Apollo and Poseidon, and its materials were inherently special, as if blessed by divine power. Thebes, however, was just an ordinary city, fundamentally incapable of stopping the Greek army led by Achilles and others. If you give up like this, poor Lady Andromache will lose her 7 brothers and her beloved father. And Troy will also lose a loyal ally. I have often heard that the hero Hector possesses a courage that others can hardly match. Whenever he is mentioned, the praise for that shining helmet is always present. That is praise for the hero who always dares to stand at the forefront of the battlefield. Brave, fearless, strong, and mighty. This is the impression the whole of Greece has of Hector. Knight's words took a turn, and the sudden praise immediately touched Hector's heart, which was already stirred by Knight's warning. He even felt a little shy. Brave, fearless. Such flattery made Hector, who had just decided not to concern himself with the surrounding city-states and to abandon other cities, look somewhat unnatural. If it were a normal time, in a different place, hearing such praise, he would certainly smile and accept it graciously. But now, his words took another turn, and Knight's tone suddenly rose, declaring loudly, "But when did the fearless foremost warrior of Troy also come to fear the sharpness of the enemy's spear? If Troy abandons the rescue of other city-states today, tomorrow, when Troy is in need, no allied nation will be willing to support or act for Troy. Or, Lord Hector, can you truly bear to see so many ordinary people brutally ravaged by the barbaric Greeks? Even your wife's family will not be spared. They might even seize the priests and priestesses who worship the sun god Apollo, and offer them, along with the most beautiful daughters of the city, to the leader of Troy's enemies, Agamemnon." Upon hearing this, Hector's face finally turned completely grim. Not only because Knight had once again mentioned his wife's family, but also because of the remark about the priestesses of the deity Apollo being captured and offered to Agamemnon. Thebes was a city that worshipped the sun god Apollo, and the name of the chief god Apollo was a taboo rarely mentioned in Troy. The reason will not be discussed for now. But if the enemy truly broke through Thebes, with the barbaric ways of the Greeks, they would surely not miss the opportunity for widespread looting and indulgence in pleasure. Let alone giving the priestesses who served the gods to their own king, even holding massive orgies in newly conquered cities was very Greek. No one would find it strange. So the question is, the Greek heroes were always impulsive and acted without thinking when faced with wine and women. Even if they knew that some actions would offend the Greek gods or even incur their wrath. But the lawless Greek heroes still dared to do it. In this era where basically everyone was a demigod, an age of heroes whose brains were in their lower bodies, who acted without thinking, and who didn't understand how to weigh pros and cons. Knight. Bah, it's an era where the bloodlines of kings from various countries can be traced back to a certain philandering god King Zeus. If not Zeus, then they were related to another philandering Poseidon. With these two brothers as the main figures, supplemented by the remaining Greek male gods and a small number of goddesses. Many Greek gods and humans had combined and given birth to offspring. Precisely because of this, many heroes of Greece actually had bloodlines and backgrounds. Here, the boundary between gods and humans in mythology is more confused and unclear than in the myths of other regions. The heroes were all fearless, with arrogant personalities that didn't put the gods in their eyes at all. Therefore, it was not uncommon for them to offend the gods and suffer curses and punishments. In short, a bunch of hotheads. Back to the main topic. If the Greek heroes broke through the city, and really gave Apollo's priestess to Agamemnon. At that time, Troy, which already had a strained relationship with sun god Apollo, would not only see Greece as the main culprit, but Troy, which failed to protect the city and allowed the priestess to be defiled, would inevitably incur the sun god's renewed wrath. Who would seize the opportunity to kick them while they were down? Speaking of which, one has to mention the awkward relationship between Troy and the gods. Initially, Troy was supported by the great god Zeus. And the ancestors of the Trojans were descendants of the great god Zeus. Even the founding of Troy was inspired by a god. It could be said to be a genuine city protected and overseen by Zeus. Later, during the city's construction, even the beautiful goddess Athena, under Zeus's command, descended to guide and protect these mortals, becoming Troy's guardian deity. Previously, Apollo and Poseidon, who were expelled from heaven for resisting Zeus, were deliberately exiled here by Zeus and made an agreement with the then king of Troy, building the mighty Trojan wall for the Trojans, but only collecting a negligible, meager reward. However, on the day the city wall was completed, the king of Troy went back on his word and did not give the due reward. Instead, he drove Apollo and others out. This completely offended these two gods. They swore that when they returned to heaven in the future, they would one day avenge today's humiliation. And now Apollo and Poseidon have returned to their seats among the 12 main gods. Without any threats, the Trojans have always worried about retaliation from these two gods. Although until now, the gods' punishments and disasters have not yet arrived. Many Trojans even firmly believe that the great god Zeus will always stand behind and protect them. Apollo and Poseidon dare not act. And the delayed retaliation from Apollo and Poseidon also made the Trojans, who gradually lowered their guard, believe that these two had forgotten the old grudges, or had given up their hatred. But Greek gods are famously petty. The Trojans did not know that, because what they did before was truly excessive. As humans, disrespecting and even humiliating the gods. These actions not only offended Apollo and Poseidon, but also made the very possessive Zeus feel dissatisfied and disgusted. Zeus did not like overly arrogant humans. In fact, behind this Trojan War, if Knight remembered correctly, rumor has it that this god-king was the one who orchestrated it. And Queen Hera, as well as the goddess Athena, who once protected this city, also participated. Siding with Greece, wanting to destroy the untrustworthy Troy. On the surface, Troy had multiple gods protecting it. God King Zeus, goddess Athena, and also Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty. But in reality, the divine alignment behind Troy could not withstand scrutiny. Even the golden apple incident given to the most beautiful goddess, the origin that triggered the Trojan War disaster, might have been at Zeus's instigation. If the big brother personally tells you to die, can you still live? Although the gods had no direct excuse to destroy Troy, they secretly facilitated the formation of this mighty battle. It can be said that all of Greece wanted Troy to be defeated and destroyed. The situation here is too complex. So this is also why Knight previously felt that leading Troy to turn the tide was simply unrealistic. It's just a pity for Helen, who was used as a tool. Tragically hinted at by the gods, and thus thought she had fallen in love with Paris and came to Troy. Of course, at this time, Hector did not know that much. All he was thinking about now was how not to offend sun god Apollo. At least not to let the gods also enter the fray. That way, Troy would truly become a living hell. This war, initiated and caused by his younger brother. As an elder brother, Hector voluntarily took full responsibility. What's more, Hector was one of the few heroes among Greek heroes who paid great attention to personal feelings. From his love for his younger brother, his protection of his sister-in-law, his bravery and fearlessness on the battlefield, and even his ferocity towards enemies but politeness and civility towards his own people. This great hero's moral character was quite good among all the Greek heroes. He valued family affection greatly. And his wife's family, whom Knight mentioned before, was his soft spot. Although Greek heroes were generally promiscuous and irresponsible in matters of love, often abandoning women after intimacy, and never taking Greek women seriously. Even many goddesses suffered such tragic fates meeting scoundrels. But Knight remembers, in the descriptions of Hector, there are recorded passages about Hector's deep love for his wife. In the Trojan War, when the war reached a stalemate in the later stages, to utterly defeat the Allied forces, Hector abandoned defending the city and instead actively dueled Achilles to observe the weaknesses of this strongest enemy hero. This was a very risky move. But, for his wife not to be humiliated, he was willing to dedicate everything to the cruel battle, even willing to bear the consequences of failure with his life, because that way he could die and be done with it, sleep beneath the piled earth, not to hear your Andromache's wailing, the screams as you are dragged away. Hector's exact words at the time were recorded as such. Even in death, what he kept thinking about and was most worried about was his wife. What he did not want to hear were her cries of sorrow when she suffered. Such deep and sincere love indeed moved people. In fact, the outwardly resolute strongman Hector was also a man imbued with kindness, universal love, and abundant tenderness. His deep affection was also well demonstrated in the latter half of that passionate and sorrowful heartfelt confession. It is worth mentioning that before going to battle, he calmly did two very important things. First, he removed his helmet, tenderly embraced his young child, leaned down and kissed him, expressing his final paternal love, then raised his voice to pray to the gods, hoping they would bless his child to grow up healthy and become even more outstanding and excellent than himself in the future. Second, he entrusted the child to his wife, stroking her and instructing her to later diligently attend to her chores, loom, and distaff, and urge on the maids in the house, comforting her not to grieve, and encouraging her to bravely face life and educate their child well in the future. Revere your gods, love your women, defend your homeland. These were the words Hector once conveyed to his warriors, and they were also his life's creed. Perhaps it is because those involved are confused while onlookers are clear. Or perhaps it is because standing from a god's perspective, Knight knew from the beginning that Troy had already been abandoned by the gods. However, Hector, who was unaware of this, clearly still held his gods in high esteem and expectation. But Knight knew very well that when the gods believed in by humans were self-aware individuals, no longer formless and insubstantial products, or illusory spiritual sustenance, faith was prone to betrayal. Hector, whose life was dedicated to the concept of guarding, had reverence, and therefore restraint. He had something to protect, and therefore no fear. His life, in summary, was always guided by responsibility. It was the so-called, must protect to the end, things that made people exert all their effort without hesitation. Whether it was life, faith, or homeland, it was these most important and essential parts of life that could ignite the deepest strength within the human heart. This allowed Hector, as a mortal hero, to be invincible on the battlefield, even powerful enough to contend with the demigod Achilles, making the demigod's meteor-like spear helpless with his formidable tactics. Affectionate. This was his strength, but also his weakness. And at this moment, Knight seized his weakness. Knight's calm and keen mental power was not only potent for himself, allowing him to quickly calm down and adapt on the battlefield, but also enabled him to perceive, to a certain extent, the true nature of others' characters and their emotional changes. It was precisely because of this that he was able to confirm, through their interactions over these past few days, that Hector was still the Hector he knew, the good man, good husband, and good father whose records in myths and legends were indeed true. He was one of the few anomalies in the Greek hero's epic. Becoming an anomaly among a pile of non-flammable garbage is, on the contrary, a compliment. And at this moment, Hector was caught in a spiritual struggle due to Knight's words, remaining silent. Seeing this scene, Knight, knowing that Hector was already hesitating, immediately added fuel to the fire. At this moment, if one met Knight's gaze, one could see his eyes shining as if flames were burning within them. Recalling the noble character of Hector recorded and described in his mind, the image of a passionate man full of true emotions. Knight took a deep breath, following the impulse in his heart, and said, I know what you are thinking, and I am also thinking about these things, but are you going to entrust the lives of Troy's citizens, your wife's parents and siblings, the chastity of the priestesses who serve your beloved gods, and all these precious things of life and loyalty to an ethereal fate? Or are you hoping that the enemy will mercifully spare the innocent people? If I were to hide from battle like a coward, I would be ashamed before the elders and brothers of Troy, and before the women of Troy with their flowing robes. My heart would not allow me to do so. I know the actions of a brave man, his courageous tenacity, always fighting alongside the brave men of Troy in the front ranks, to win great glory for himself and for our fathers. If you are afraid, then please let me go, and let me fight alone. When the last words fell, they were delivered in one breath, yet they were deafening. Buzz. Hector's brain and ears seemed to be vibrating. No, for Hector, it was more than just a simple vibration. At this moment, upon hearing Knight's words, a profound shock, as if from the depths of his soul, surged within Hector's heart. Knight's words struck directly at his heart, as if calling out his own inner voice, making him feel, in a trance, as if he had seen another, himself. This inner self interrogation was a dimension-reducing blow, instantly leaving Hector stunned and his scalp tingling. Hector suddenly shivered, and cold sweat broke out all over his back. He didn't know what was wrong with him. He actually felt as if he was facing his future self, glaring at him, questioning him. It was not strange for Hector to have such a feeling. This was entirely because 80 to 90% of these words were originally spoken by the future Hector to his wife when he faced the powerful Greek enemy forces, intending to fight to the death and then live. At that time, he had gone through a decade of war and hardship, and the feelings and life insights he expressed were deafening to Hector, who was still 10 years in the past, no less than a guiding light. The sense of responsibility contained within, the duty of a man to protect his home, his country, and his loved ones, this noble quality, incredibly rare and shining in the ancient Greece world, shone for the first time in the Greek world, but it illuminated the original author himself. And what about Hector at this moment? He trembled all over, his eyes wide, even bloodshot, ashamed to the point of wanting to disappear. He seemed to understand, and while sighing in relief, he chose to completely follow his inner voice. Yes, death is not terrifying, but there are things more terrifying than death. You are right, I apologize, I really shouldn't have chosen to abandon my people and my allies after learning of the enemy's strength. As the Prince of Troy, I should never abandon any citizen until the very last moment. Thank you, Knight. Thank you for waking me up. I have felt your noble character and your deep love for Troy. All right, then let us be crazy once. Troy's strongest hero, Hector, never fears death, nor does he fear challenges. As he spoke, Hector, whose blood also began to boil, felt as if he had found a sense of destiny. That emotion swept away all the gloom in Hector's heart at this moment, filling him with infinite courage. His gaze became sharp. At the same time, a great deal of warmth and fondness rose in his heart for Knight. Just based on Knight's previous words, he completely regarded him as his confidant. Between saving and not saving, he chose not to save, but after Knight's reminder, both publicly and privately, knowing that surrounding cities might be in danger, this upright hero could not sit idly by. Whether it was to prevent other allied nations from feeling disheartened, or to save his wife's family, heroes also have selfish desires, and moreover, Hector did not want to see the sun god turn his anger on Troy because his serving maidens were defiled. Was the battlefield not chaotic enough already? If the gods were to personally intervene, the problem would become even more serious and uncontrollable. So, Knight and Hector began to discuss, finally deciding to secretly dispatch multiple small contingents of troops in batches during the night, to the extent possible, to warn other cities before the Greeks acted, so that they could prepare their defenses, and support each other. Distant cities were impossible, but for nearby cities, they would try their best to have the soldiers stationed in those cities protect the citizens and move them to Troy City. In ancient Greece, a small city's population was only a few thousand at most, and it was not uncommon for cities to have only a few hundred people. The ancestors of the Trojans once carried large amounts of treasure, cattle, and sheep, and wherever the cattle and sheep lay down, they would hastily decide to establish a nation there. People of this era could build a city very arbitrarily. So these surrounding cities, rather than being cities, simply did not have the magnificent wonders and large populations of cities in later eras. Only a few hundred or a few thousand people, if they were fast enough before the Greek allied forces reacted, and had soldiers from Troy City to meet them, it was indeed possible to succeed. No matter what, leaving them outside to face the 160,000 Greek allied forces that could sweep through at any time, a single spit from each person could drown their small hills. Other cities did not have walls as hard as Troy's, nor did they have divine protection. All in all, migrating might lead to death on the way, but not migrating would inevitably lead to death or enslavement. You successfully persuaded Hector. A day passed quickly. After the Greek allied forces failed to capture Troy city, they temporarily retreated to the coast to rest and discuss countermeasures. At this time, the Greeks were not yet aware of your plan. When midnight arrived, you and Hector donned your armor and, under the cover of darkness, led a small contingent out of Troy without being discovered. However, when other small detachments subsequently left to deliver messages to surrounding cities, Greek allied forces scouts discovered them, but did not act rashly. They merely observed from afar. The scouts reported Troy's suspicious movements to the leaders of the Greek allied forces, Odysseus and others. This put many Greek kings, led by Agamemnon, on high alert, thinking you were planning a night raid, so they strengthened their night patrols and defenses. Due to the darkness and the scouts' reluctance to get too close, they failed to notice that the direction many of these small detachments were heading was entirely opposite to the Greek allied forces' base. By the time the Greek allied forces realized the numbers were off, and that these small detachments were insufficient to threaten the Greek side, Odysseus personally led a team to intercept one of them. The Greek allied forces discovered your plan. They were quite shaken, believing that if the people from other cities were allowed to rendezvous with Troy, Troy would become even more difficult to conquer. In order to eliminate Troy's reinforcements, and reduce Troy's effective strength, under Odysseus's command, the Greek allied forces began to act according to their original trajectory, and the main Greek army began to march towards the cities surrounding Troy. However, just as several powerful heroes, led by Achilles, had left with their troops, Paris, who had been waiting for a long time after Hector's notification, saw the Greek allied forces divide their troops. He suddenly led Troy's soldiers out of the city and ambushed the Greek camp's rear. The unprepared Greek allied forces suffered thousands of casualties in an instant. Odysseus was even almost shot and wounded by Paris. By the time the Greek allied forces reacted and angrily wanted to turn back and deal with this Trojan army, the Trojans, familiar with the local terrain, did not linger in battle under the cover of night. After a quick strike, they retreated back into Troy and hid. The enraged Odysseus led his army in pursuit again, but after 4 unsuccessful attempts to storm the city, he saw that the situation was not right, immediately calmed down, and led his soldiers to retreat and re-garrison the coast. After this ambush, the Greek allied forces dared not divide their troops further. However, thinking that Hector was still in the city, and given Hector's defensive tactics, they had difficulty conquering Troy before dividing their forces, let alone after. Odysseus and others, having no confidence in taking Troy, were thus held back and remained outside Troy. At this moment, inside Troy, the hero Paris was drinking and celebrating the victory of this battle with his brothers. Ha 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 ha. As expected of brother Hector, those Greek allied forces really didn't expect us to take the opportunity to ambush them. What a pity, if it weren't for my elder brother's request, I would have liked to kill a few more Greek allied forces. It would have been great if I could have shot Odysseus and Menelaus through the head. At the head of the victory banquet, Paris was incredibly excited and exhilarated. After being suppressed by the Greek allied forces for so long, it was a rare opportunity to launch a counterattack and secure a small victory. How could he not be happy? And when the Greek allied forces sent Odysseus and Menelaus for peace talks last time, Paris, who had already regarded Helen and the treasures taken from the king of Sparta as his achievements and symbols of his glory, would never allow these 2 thieves to covet his wealth. That was what the goddess had bestowed upon him as his due. For enemies who coveted his treasures, Paris would absolutely show no mercy if he had the chance. Unfortunately, he almost hit Odysseus, the military commander of the Greek allied forces, this time. There won't be such a good opportunity for a sneak attack amidst the chaos next time. It's still safer to follow Lord Hector's arrangements, Paris. Although we succeeded in this ambush, the Greek allied forces outnumber Troy by several times. Once they react, if we get entangled in a fight, we'll be in danger. Someone among Paris's brothers at the banquet spoke up. Of course I know, it's just a pity. Next time, when brother Hector returns, he will definitely be able to lead us to drive those Greek allied forces completely back to Greece. Paris raised his wine glass, a smile on his face, as if he had already seen the future, the dawn of victory destined for Troy. Since that's the case, a little dampening of the mood now doesn't matter. Paris held a blind reverence and admiration for his invincible elder brother. He did not believe that the Greek allied forces could defeat his brother Hector. Agamemnon couldn't, Odysseus couldn't, and Menelaus, that king of Sparta whom he had cuckolded, certainly couldn't. They were not heroes skilled in battlefield combat. While Ajax possessed an unparalleled shield, he was only good at defense. The only one who might pose a threat was probably Achilles, rumored to be a demigod. But his brother was invincible, he would absolutely never lose. His father wanted to kill him since he was young, just because of a prophecy. His mother's weakness prevented her from resisting, instead, she cruelly abandoned him. Although they later accepted Paris, Paris harbored no feelings for these parents in his heart. The only one worthy of respect was Hector, the eldest prince of Troy, who was most likely to inherit the future throne, yet showed no apprehension towards Paris, who might threaten his right of succession upon his return. Instead, he was full of love, always standing at the very front on the battlefield, firmly protecting him from behind. An elder brother is like a father. Hector truly acted like a father, sheltering and loving Paris. He shone like the sun, making it difficult even for Paris to harbor any ill will, and Paris gradually became captivated and yearned for his brother's powerful charisma. In Troy, there was no enemy that brother Hector couldn't defeat. Brother Hector is invincible. Paris, who had never doubted this point, felt no fear even when facing the mighty Greek allied forces. And Hector's existence was his greatest spiritual pillar of reassurance. Now his brother had once again proven his strength to him. As expected of brother Hector, he had already anticipated that the enemy, after failing to conquer Troy for a long time, would focus on the surrounding cities, and immediately took action. He even allowed him to ambush and successfully raid Odysseus's army. Being cooped up behind high walls by the Greek allied forces, unable to move an inch, had truly stifled him. This battle, a redemption of his humiliation, not only made Paris genuinely happy but also increased his respect for his brother, who could predict events like a god and was always a step ahead. Listen, although we've achieved a small victory, we mustn't let our guard down. Send men to continue watching Odysseus. I want to completely tie him down outside Troy, making it impossible for him to move. As if suddenly thinking of something, Paris spoke, and his subordinates quickly obeyed. At this moment, a resolute look flashed in Paris's eyes. I must guard Troy for my brother, and buy enough time. Although I don't know why my brother is so wary of Odysseus, as long as he is kept busy and has no time to spare troops to support other armies, it should be fine, right? And so, Paris and Odysseus's army became embroiled in a prolonged engagement. Although Odysseus cautiously held his ground and didn't send out more troops, Paris still led his army in sudden night raids and acts of sabotage from time to time, but he never dared to truly get close. He just kept using guerrilla tactics, creating noise, preventing the Greeks from getting any sleep. And such tactics were told to him by his incredibly wise brother, Hector. Send a small number of troops to take turns harassing the enemy, but do not engage them in direct combat. However, once the enemy truly relaxes, that's the real time for a night raid and a hunt. Such underhanded tactics were quite a shock and impact for both the Greeks and Trojans of this era, who were typically straightforward and direct in battle. Although at first there might have been some guilt, once they felt how much fun it was to be the underhanded one tormenting others, they immediately grasped the essence and became tireless in their efforts. Lord Hector, brother, is truly too insidious, too wise. To be able to conceive such a great tactic. Both the Trojans and Paris had a new understanding of this great prince, as if they had only truly come to know this greatest warrior of Troy. Not only in strength, but his wisdom was equally terrifying. And at this moment, who was the strongest warrior of Greece and Troy that they so highly praised? Meanwhile, on the shortest path from Troy to Thebes. Completely unaware that everyone in Troy had been Dihua attributing all their imaginative feats and accomplishments to Hector, Paris and the others. After leaving with Hector that night, they galloped through the night, rushing to Thebes without stopping. Logically speaking, Hector, as the commander-in-chief of the Trojan side, should not have participated in such a dangerous plan. However, on the battlefields of ancient Greece, especially in this era of numerous heroes, examples of leading from the front, or even individualistic heroes putting themselves in danger, are too numerous to list. As one of the rare family-oriented, oddball, good men in Greece, Hector, who was deeply devoted to his wife, decided to personally rescue his in-laws. And along the way, Hector also took great care of Yi, showing him great importance. The tactics Paris employed were actually all told to Hector by Yi. That's right, Yi was the one who truly proposed the tactical suggestions. As for Paris's side, one can only say it was a beautiful misunderstanding, and when the misunderstanding is cleared, the scene will surely be quite interesting. Hector, who was unaware of this, although he had never seen or employed such tactics before, could still judge the quality of a tactic, whether it was excellent or practical, with the discerning eye of a battle-hardened warrior, especially one like Hector, a master of tactics. It was precisely this display by Yi that made Hector realize that this friend, who spoke his heart and with whom he felt a deep affinity, not only possessed the same fervent heart of protection as himself, being a responsible and good man, but was also a very wise person. He brought tactics far exceeding this era into this world, and this extraordinary talent, coupled with his ability to quickly adapt and learn on the battlefield, made Hector immediately realize. You have the potential to become a hero, Yi. It's a pity this war came too soon. If I had time to properly hone you, you would shine with the most dazzling brilliance on the battlefield of Troy. The gods in heaven would marvel at your excellence. At this moment, it was late at night. After half a night of travel, Hector's fatigued team was lighting a bonfire in the forest, resting temporarily. And at this time, Hector finally spoke the words he had been holding back for a long time to Yi. He sincerely believed that Yi had the potential to become a hero. However, a hero. No, if it weren't for this war, you probably wouldn't have known me, Lord Hector, Yi replied. Moreover, the heroes of Greece, even dogs wouldn't want to be. It is well known that in Greece, the more extraordinary deeds a hero accomplishes, the more tragic their end often is, just like their shining achievements. For example, Achilles, Hector, and Jason, who all met tragic deaths in the end. Even Hercules, the Hercules who completed the 12 labors and ultimately achieved godhood, also experienced the tragic loss of his beloved son once. In Greece, being a hero is not a good profession. Hector, who completely failed to sense Yi's lack of interest in the name of hero, because almost no one in Greece didn't take pride in becoming a hero, how could there be a young man who didn't want to become a hero? At this moment, Hector still smiled and said, "Call me Hector. Your noble character has already earned my approval. I consider you a friend, a confidant, a brother, and I hope you will see me the same way. If it weren't for wartime, I would definitely introduce my eligible sisters at home to you. I wish I had met you sooner." At this moment, Hector's enthusiastic and appreciative attitude far exceeded Yi's imagination. Even during their journey, Hector's mouth never stopped. Perhaps his previous words truly had a great impact on Hector. If it were an ordinary Trojan soldier, treated with such enthusiasm by the great prince of Troy, who was also likely to be the future king of Troy, Hector, they would either be overjoyed or overly frightened, already at a loss. Fortunately, although the simulated universe experience was very real and felt no different from the real world, Yi still maintained a clear mind. He clearly realized that his true identity was not a Trojan soldier, and in this simulated universe, he was destined to be just a passerby and would not truly affect the history of that mythical world. Yi, slightly speechless, but quickly adjusting his mindset, Yi said neither humbly nor arrogantly, "Okay. Since that's the case, I'll call you by your given name, Hector. It's an honor to be your friend. Now I have a request, I wonder if you can grant it, in the name of friendship." Taking advantage of Hector's current enthusiasm, Yi, who hadn't forgotten what he was doing in the simulated universe, seized the opportunity and shamelessly asked. And this attitude made the other accompanying cavalry feel a bit arrogant and excessive. Having just become the prince's friend, he dared to make a request. His guts were too big. The strong concept of hierarchy and respect for superiors prevented these people from agreeing with Yi's actions, and they even prepared to step forward, ready to seize Yi and punish him severely at Hector's command. However, not only did Hector not feel any displeasure, but he readily agreed, regardless of what the request was. In his opinion, Yi, who could speak such heartfelt words earlier, must be a sincere and righteous man and would not make any unreasonable or difficult demands. Since it was a friend's request, he would naturally help. And under Hector's gaze, Yi finally spoke, slowly and firmly stating his objective. I want you to instruct me in my martial arts. Time flew by, and Yi's final request was, as expected, granted by Hector. Instructing Yi in martial arts was something Hector was very willing to do. He already had this idea. He just hadn't had the time before. But now that Yi had spoken, Hector naturally wouldn't hold back. And so, Hector, from the very beginning on the battlefield, I noticed you imitating my attack movements. Although still very crude. Your learning speed already far surpasses that of other ordinary people. We don't have time for detailed study now. Along the way, I will simply teach you some weapon-wielding postures, methods of using and activating strength. And the best teacher is still the battlefield. I will start teaching you from the most basic aspects. After that, practice will be through real combat, for you to comprehend on your own. Once you gradually become proficient, I will teach you more combat techniques. After Hector made such a solemn promise, every day thereafter, apart from travel time, Hector was instructing Yi in various combat methods. And Yi, like a sponge, tirelessly and madly absorbed all combat techniques, fiercely making up for his lack of fundamentals. Yi didn't mind that Hector didn't immediately start teaching him high-difficulty combat skills. Rather, he was very self-aware. His previous self, although relying on unique mental power and a forced calm will, could, on the battlefield, determine dangerous opportunities at the fastest speed, avoid harm, and engage in the optimal combat method. This helped him quickly adapt to the battlefield rhythm and survive to the end. However, because he was completely ignorant of martial arts, he was fighting entirely by instinct and brute force. Whether it was stamina consumption or head-on combat, his advantages would be infinitely reduced. Since he decided to truly become strong, he shouldn't just focus on improving physical strength. Standing still and taking hits was not his style. Even if he trained his body to be as invulnerable as Achilles. One day he might encounter some divine artifact with a defense-piercing attribute, ignoring defense and instantly killing him with one strike. Therefore, he always believed, only dead enemies are good enemies. As long as all enemies within sight are eliminated, one is safe. These two principles. Yi's purpose in learning martial arts was simple and pure. To annihilate all enemies faster than they could when encountering them. And Hector, completely unaware of Yi's mental state and combat attitude, which was so cautious it would make even enemies fear him, was at this moment still dreaming of cultivating Yi into a hero. In his opinion, Yi's strong desire for power must mean he also had the ambition to become a hero, to establish his own great achievements and glory. And as a friend, he would naturally help Yi become stronger with all his heart. Unfortunately, as a mortal hero, although Hector had trained himself to possess extraordinary martial arts, he was not necessarily capable of guiding the growth of a hero. Not everyone was qualified to be a hero's mentor. Knowing something and knowing how to teach it are two different matters. Originally, if Yi were just an ordinary soldier, Hector would still have the confidence to guide him a bit. But cultivating a hero was not that simple. Hector saw the qualities and wisdom of a hero in Yi. For a potential hero like him, who leaned towards wisdom, perhaps being personally taught by the legendary teacher of heroes, the wise centaur known as the Sage, Chiron, would better unleash his potential. Furthermore, Hector also thought of goddess Athena, the patron deity of the city-state of Troy. A goddess with extraordinary wisdom and martial arts. If he was lucky enough to be personally taught by a Greek god, that would be even better. In all of ancient Greece, what could be more suitable as a teacher for heroes than a Greek god? He couldn't be the only one to discover Yi's brilliance. At this moment, Hector felt a strong urge to share good things, for everyone to know. If it weren't for the fact that his ancestors had no divine bloodline and no means of communicating with Greek gods, he might have even wanted to actively promote Yi. And if Yi knew that Hector was still fantasizing about him being personally taught by a Greek god, he would definitely want to take a break. Good heavens! If it weren't for the simulated universe. If he were truly targeted by Greek gods, committing suicide might actually lead to a happier life. Being targeted by beings whose strength and life levels were far superior to his own, whether it was curious goodwill or malice, was extremely dangerous. Don't you see how few of the famous heroes in Greek history had a good end? The relationships between the Greek gods were intricate. When you got close to one Greek god, you might attract the malice of that Greek god's enemy Greek god. Even your own worshipped main god, often when in a bad mood, could be smiling one moment and change their face the next, directly giving you divine punishment, or even casting you into hell, which would not be strange at all. Wasn't Troy the best example? In its early stages, it was a nation with both strength and background. Its big brother behind the scenes was Zeus, king of the Greek gods. But if your big brother wants to mess with you, how can there be a way out? With the goal of training Yi into a hero, even if it was just teaching him the basics, Hector was very strict with Yi. And this was exactly what Yi wanted. Even if he temporarily had no thoughts of becoming some kind of hero. For Yi, it was naturally better to become as strong as possible, and there was no such thing as being too meticulous on the path to becoming stronger, so he trained with the strictest requirements. And so, time flew by like a white steed passing a crack. Soon, during the journey from Troy to Thebes, you learned the basic usage techniques of the spear, shield, sword, and bow and arrow from Hector. Due to limited time, limited conditions, and limited energy, you ultimately focused your efforts on learning the martial arts of the spear. You knew that this was Hector's most proficient weapon. According to legend, Hector almost broke the shield of Ajax, said to be 7 walls thick, with a single throw. You were very interested in this. At a critical moment, this might be used as an ultimate move. You asked Hector about the throwing technique. Hector taught you everything he knew without reservation. Speaking of throwing, you need to pay attention to how you exert force. Unite your essence, chi, and spirit into one. Focusing on a single point, a full power strike that can even tear the earth apart when launched to its extreme. As Hector's words fell, a scene automatically replayed in Yi's mind. It was the terrifying moment he witnessed the legendary demigod great hero, Achilles, throwing a spear from afar, when he first encountered a battlefield. Although it was just a casual throw of a spear, the vortex it created easily plowed through the earth, leaving a long gully. What happened to the flesh and blood bodies that stood in the path of this meteor? Was, of course, obvious. Their blood had already splattered on every piece of land. Undoubtedly, this was an explosive technique, typically high burst, high damage, but with the drawback of needing to retrieve the weapon after throwing. This meant it was a killing move that required a specific timing. And could not be used frequently. To learn throwing well, just listening to my explanation is completely insufficient. Just right. Let me give you a personal demonstration. At this time, in the forest, the accompanying knights were resting by a bonfire not far away, while Hector was individually guiding Yi's cultivation. Both of them had spiritual power far exceeding that of ordinary people. Even if they used all their rest time for teaching and training, they didn't feel much fatigue. At this moment, Hector stood up, picked up his long spear and walked forward. Then his sharp gaze fell upon a large tree not far away. Hector, watch closely, I'll only do this once. Yi nodded, also concentrating intently on Hector. His gaze locked onto Hector's various joints and muscles. The next moment, Hector assumed a stance. And it was at this moment that a strong sense of danger surged into Yi's heart. His hair suddenly stood on end. Even though he wasn't directly facing Hector, just being close to him gave him an urge to retreat. A crisp sound of bones cracking echoed from in front. Hector gripped the long spear tightly in his hand, then adjusted his breathing. The entire forest seemed to quiet down with his rhythmic breathing. And then, the moment his spirit, energy, and essence were all adjusted to the most perfect state. Boom! He moved. Hector suddenly let out a furious roar. As the long spear, like lightning, like thunder, suddenly tore through the sky. When it landed in the distance, it violently pierced through one tree after another. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The god spear, like lightning, instantly passed through countless tree trunks. And those trees exploded in place, turning into countless splinters filling the sky. At a speed that even ordinary people couldn't perceive with their naked eyes. Just a slight thought would make one imagine the terrifying power that spear would unleash on a battlefield. It was practically a walking natural disaster. When he threw it, people hadn't even reacted. By the time they did, that terrifying spear, like the wrath of Zeus from the heavens, had already descended upon the enemy's chest. This unparalleled strike. Who could withstand it? The long spear finally stopped after shattering an unknown number of trees. And at this moment, the path, as if swept by a tornado, had already formed a deep gully. Hector's perfectly executed strike, after adjusting his state, was even more terrifying than Achilles' hurried spear throw that he had witnessed that day. Whoosh! Taking a deep breath, Yi's wide eyes were now filled with nothing but profound shock. He had originally thought that Achilles' god spear, thrown like a meteor, was already powerful enough. It was fundamentally a non-human, iron Tyrannosaurus-like existence. Is the demigod bloodline really that powerful? He attributed that astonishing power to the demigod bloodline. However, Hector, who was clearly just a mortal hero, now displayed power that was in no way inferior to Achilles, and even subtly surpassed him. Of course, Hector had charged up, adjusting his own state to the most perfect level before throwing this strike. Achilles at full power might not lose. But no matter what, Hector indeed demonstrated his powerful capabilities. No wonder in the future, he dared to challenge Achilles directly, seeking Achilles' weakness. If he were even slightly weaker, and couldn't keep up with Achilles' power, being defeated in one encounter would truly be a surrender for nothing. When mortals train their martial arts and physical bodies to the extreme, they can also achieve the true posture of a hero. Humans in the ancient Greece mythology era, though not as close to gods as the golden humans of the earliest legends, still harbored immense potential within their bodies. Through continuous training and fighting in life and death crises, some people used adversity as a whetstone, advancing triumphantly and achieving the posture of a hero. From Hector, you witnessed an astonishing throwing technique, and observed up close Hector's entire process, from his stance and grip to his full body breathing, and the unity of his spirit, energy, and essence, leading to that earth-shattering spear throw. Your powerful spiritual force vaguely gained some insight, seeming to glimpse a method of converting vitality into power. The stronger the physical body, the more surging vitality it possesses. And this mystery hidden within the human body, when converted into power through special techniques, can unleash many non-human martial arts. You gradually realize the essence of this power, and speculated that the magic power of the magicians in the Age of Gods was probably also converted from vitality. In many worldviews you are familiar with, there are indeed connections between mana, magic power, and vitality. After that spear throw, a light rain suddenly began to fall from the sky. After a rustling sound of rain, the rain grew heavier. But neither of them cared about the harsh weather. Hector patiently explained to Yi the muscles and force exertion techniques he used during his throw, combining it with the chi and blood circulation and force exertion concepts from his hometown's traditional martial arts. Yi quickly understood all the different types of force Hector described. However, regarding how to utilize the vitality within his body to convert it into a power like chi, Yi was still half understood and completely confused, only able to constantly frown and carefully sense. Even Hector didn't know how to teach him to use this power. This required personal enlightenment. Once you felt it, you would achieve it. Hector couldn't even give that power a professional definition. It was Yi, combining his own understanding, who temporarily called the power unleashed by the conversion of vitality, chi. Hector's previous strike had opened the door to a new world for him. He could still clearly recall the feeling from just now, but he was just one step away. Yi also knew that such things couldn't be rushed. So he continued to learn weapon usage techniques with Hector, while constantly trying to replicate Hector's spear-throwing motion from that day. He could clearly perceive that he also had a faint amount of chi within his body, proving that there was no such thing as his body being different from humans in the mythical era and thus unable to learn this power. And what he needed to do now was to learn how to convert his abundant vitality into chi. Then use chi to strengthen his body, continuously growing and nourishing his physique, until he grew to be like heroes such as Achilles and Hector, achieving a non-human posture. Hector stated that combat would allow him to more easily sense the potential within his body. So, after that, whenever Yi had free time, he would pester Hector to train with him. Hector actively controlled his strength, trying to fight Yi with the physical qualities of an ordinary person. But no matter how much a lion restrains itself, it can never become a true house cat. The powerful strength of Hector's physical body, occasionally displayed unconsciously, always caused Yi some injuries and pressure. Because they had no wooden weapons. They could only fight with real weapons. And after a long spear once grazed Yi, Hector seriously asked if they should delay the sparring and wait until they returned to the city to switch to wooden weapons for the next step of training. But Yi refused, knowing how powerful the enemy he was about to face was the demigod Achilles. If he didn't seize the time to become stronger, he probably wouldn't even be able to get close to the enemy. Yi was running out of time. Moved by Yi's tenacity and ruthlessness, Hector grew to admire Yi even more. A true warrior disregards life and death. Even if he cannot be fearless in the face of death, he will never shrink back because of a little danger or hardship. Such a person would find it very difficult to grow into a true hero. He truly hadn't misjudged him. As the Prince of Troy, the strongest hero of Troy, who had fought his way through blood and fire, Hector was naturally not a soft-hearted man. Thus, in the following days, Hector no longer overly suppressed his power. He even consciously and occasionally revealed a corner of his strength, putting pressure on Yi to help him grow. And in battles against this humanoid Tyrannosaurus, whose strength was in no way inferior to Achilles, even a casual trace of power, a light graze, could cause physical disability to others. Yi indeed felt immense pressure, and stimulated by this intense crisis, he fought, observed, and learned Hector's fighting style, gradually comprehending more and more. Occasionally, he could also unconsciously convert a trace of life force into vigor and unleash it. After this surprising discovery, Yi's challenges became more frequent, without Hector needing to push him. What astonishing growth speed! Hector made no secret of his amazement at Yi's growth speed. This also made Yi confirm that he indeed seemed to have a great talent for becoming a hero. His body in the simulated universe was the materialization of his spiritual body, which could be said to be a perfect replication of reality. He wondered if the stellarn inside him had transformed his body. After all, the original him. As an ordinary person living in a future modern world. Let alone having a talent whose growth speed would astonish even people from the age of myths. His sub-healthy body would be out of breath after running just 2 laps, probably not even as strong as the weakest Troy soldier. Of course, Yi's growth speed was also closely related to his insane self-improvement attitude. Driven by that madness, even Hector couldn't help but become immersed in it. And for a time, their journey was slowed down. This caused the other accompanying Troy soldiers, who had witnessed everything happening over the past few days, to go from initial shock to fright, and finally to gradual numbness. They seemed to see another monster, as powerful as hero Hector about to be born in the future. And this also gave the Troy soldiers a sense of reassurance. In the ancient Greece era, people's inherent reverence for the strong made their impression of Yi, from a lucky colleague who gained hero Hector's appreciation, change step by step, becoming vastly different. Although Yi's current status was still just a soldier, their gazes towards Yi unconsciously carried a hint of respect for a strong person. Soldier A. Hero Hector is teaching that man, divine arts, right? Soldier B. Power that transcends mortals. Only heroes can master. The ultimate in throwing techniques that constantly advances towards the realm of the Greek god, undoubtedly. You and I are witnessing the birth of a new hero. At this moment, the soldiers looked at the two fighting and clashing in the distance, rather. It was more like Hector unilaterally feeding moves to Yi, and they couldn't help but discuss. Clearly, the soldiers did not understand the method of converting life force into power. But, as Hector's trusted soldiers, they were very familiar with hero Hector's martial arts. If a warrior who mastered the method of converting life force and could unleash power far beyond ordinary people had the potential to become a hero, then Hector's throwing technique, though nameless, was a genuine manifestation of the pinnacle of a martial art that only true heroes could master. Be it a spear or the god spear. A certain queen of the land of shadows once said that a spear's strike, if it reaches perfection, can slay a god with a mere flick of the wrist. And based on a special throwing technique derived from spear mastery, Hector's throwing art, though still far from the level of slaying celestial gods, could easily kill even ordinary heroes, and it almost pierced through the 7-layered holy shield of Ajax. The soldiers once heard the heroes boast at banquets. And when they spoke of hero Hector's throwing technique, their expressions would change, calling it the most likely to touch upon divine arts. What divine arts truly were, the soldiers didn't know. They just felt it was incredibly profound. But even they, who were not connoisseurs, could realize that it was definitely not a skill that ordinary heroes could learn. Divine arts, such powerful martial arts that made other heroes' expressions change, were now being taught to a man who didn't even have the title of hero. The soldiers had personally witnessed Hector instructing Yi in his throwing technique. That terrifying scene, even from a great distance, remained shocking no matter how many times they saw it. If Yi was just learning some ordinary weapon handling skills from hero Hector, they wouldn't have thought much of it. But it was then that the soldiers realized how much Hector valued Yi. Afterward, the soldiers initially thought that Yi could never master the throwing technique. Could such inhuman power be learned just by studying? If it were them feeling the desperate, vast gap in power, they would have given up long ago. But looking at Yi, who had been learning throwing from hero Hector for the past few days and seemed to be making progress, the soldiers just felt what was wrong with this world. They were dumbfounded. Could he really master it? Looking at hero Hector's amazed and seemingly genuine joy when discussing with Yi, it seemed truly possible for him to succeed. It was precisely because of this that they held a deep reverence for Yi, who could learn the so-called divine arts, even if he might have only touched upon its surface. Well, the soldiers didn't care whether it was merely aspiring to divine arts, or truly reaching it. Anyway, in their minds, they had already linked their prince's powerful throwing technique with it. In short, as long as it sounded awesome, someone who could learn such an awesome thing naturally deserved their admiration. Another man who can walk the path of a hero. How enviable, being a hero. I also wish I had such great power. Then the maidens in Troy would surely line the streets to welcome me, letting me choose as I please. You'd better go wash up and sleep early. Say your dream talk in your dreams. Can any human really learn a skill identical to a natural calamity just by witnessing it? This is simply too outrageous. As a few soldiers chatted and joked, they burst into laughter. If Yi had merely become Hector's confidant due to an excellent performance, the soldiers might have felt envy and jealousy. But when he displayed the potential to embark on the path of a hero, far exceeding ordinary people, the soldiers were left only with reverence and longing. On the other side, Yi had been constantly trying to recall that one spear strike from that day over the past few days. A single point of concentrated spirit, energy, and mind, capable of a world-shaking strike even from a mortal body. As the saying goes, the first step is always the hardest. Having passed the most difficult stage of comprehending the basics of Qi, the subsequent matters became much simpler. Through continuous imitation, Yi was already able to replicate a rudimentary stance. Through circulating his vital energy and blood, and strengthening his power to shoot a spear with his abundant life force, his current attack was still far from reaching Hector's strike that day. However, his current attack definitely far surpassed those of ordinary soldiers. And Yi's diligence was all seen by Hector. Due to time constraints, Hector no longer sparred with Yi afterward but instead led them to accelerate their journey. But even so, Yi would still secretly practice alone at night. After learning the training method for tempering the body, which could be called a staple for heroes in the Greek Age of Gods, Yi could continuously strengthen his power, which in turn nourished his life force, achieving a perfect cycle. He almost became more energetic the more he trained. However, this also led to an increased appetite, and the rations brought from Troy had long been consumed. They could only randomly select some lucky, wild game, from the forest. Of course, this also wouldn't have been possible without Hector's help. These past few nights, Yi also successfully learned basic hunting techniques from him. For the heroes of the Greek world, almost none of them couldn't survive in the wild. Their wilderness survival skills were maxed out per person. And Yi gradually came to understand why, when he used to read mythology. Heroes like Heracles, even if they didn't sleep for days and nights, fought so ferociously when they encountered powerful monsters, as if they were on steroids. At first, he thought it was due to their demigod bloodline, innate divine strength, and much stronger recovery ability than ordinary people. But in reality, it wasn't just the Greek world. In Celtic mythology, Norse mythology, and the like, combat endurance was an essential ability for those famous heroes. Good stamina was also the foundation for becoming a great hero. Especially on the battlefield, if one ran out of steam after a burst. What kind of one-man charge would that be? It would be a guaranteed head delivery. For heroes who could clear the battlefield like Achilles and Hector. They were even more skilled in this regard. They wouldn't tire even after fighting for 10 days and 10 nights. Aside from possible mental fatigue, the physical exertion was even less than their recovery speed. The flesh-tempering methods of the heroes of the Age of Gods were just that unreasonable. No wonder it was rare to see heroes beaten to death by ordinary people. Finally, just the night before reaching Thebes. In the forest, Yi assumed a stance and took a deep breath, closing his eyes to feel every inch of his body's strength. He used his breathing to gradually regulate his spirit and internal chi and blood until they reached a perfect frequency resonance. Time passed little by little, in this endless silence. Like an hourglass, nothing else could record this moment in a still world. Finally. Boom tilde. When, at a certain moment, the perception of his essence, chi, and spirit converged infinitely. This was the moment. He felt it, no longer hesitating. Yi suddenly threw the spear in his hand, adding his own insights to the throwing technique he learned from Hector. And the spiral-like surge of chi that was extra when he threw, compared to Hector's throw, was like a swift wind, like a meteor streaking across the sky, a single spear throw. Yi threw the spear in his hand, and it finally ripped through the atmosphere, suddenly piercing through towering trees one after another. Finally, it impaled itself in the distant mountain rock. Clap, 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 applause. Hector, who had been watching for a long time, exclaimed, to be able to pierce through a large tree without completely destroying its interior. Even though your current strength is still far from mine. Your destructive efficiency alone amazes even me. To think of a way to make the spear rotate at high speed to increase its penetration. Yi, you are truly a genius. You are a hero born for battle. I can't wait to see you when you accomplish a feat that will astonish the gods. Thank you for the compliment. But my strength is still far from enough, Hector. Is there any way to increase my strength further in a short period? Yi asked. Thebes is almost here, and if he's lucky, he might encounter Achilles tomorrow. Yi felt an urgency in his heart constantly urging him to become stronger. With his current combat power, could he reach Achilles? Although if Hector were to take him, it should be no problem at all. But Yi did not intend for Hector to get deeply involved in this battle. This first warrior of Troy, a great hero who could pierce through 6 layers of Ajax's shield, though powerful, was by no means an opponent for that invulnerable demigod. If it were a one-on-one fight, the outcome would likely be the same as in the original story, a tragic death. Yi, who had unknowingly received much favor, was somewhat reluctant to use Hector's sacrifice to achieve his own goals. Hector will die. The Trojan War might not even last 10 years. It could end early due to key personnel leaving the battlefield on both sides. As Troy's strongest spear and shield, and the spiritual pillar of all Trojans, Hector's importance to Troy was self-evident. Although for Yi, this was just a simulated universe. And what was simulated was just a conceptual body of the universe, not real history. That history, long buried in myth, could not be changed. The dead would not be resurrected, and the outcome was already set. No matter what he did in this world, it would not affect the course of history. By the same token, as long as he became stronger by any means, that would suffice. He could use everything at his disposal. For this world, he was just a transient visitor. But when he thought about whether to use Hector to get him in front of Achilles, Yi hesitated. Through these past few days of contact, he could genuinely feel that every person here was flesh and blood. Far from being mere memories of historical past. Perhaps they truly were just specks of dust, data, recorded in the universe's history. But whether it was the soldiers, longing for the war to end victoriously when they chatted, their yearning for family, their loud laughter when joking about how beautiful a certain maiden in the city was, or Hector's enthusiasm and sincerity when teaching him, none of these were fake. Although Yi kept telling himself that Hector's admiration for him, and his treating him as a friend, was not unrelated to that previous statement that reiterated his future words. Perhaps it was a case of kindred spirits, seeing each other as similar. Like a cheat code, directly hitting the sweet spot according to a guide. Striking a chord in the heart, a resonance in the soul. He had deceived the other party from the very beginning. And was by no means the noble person the other party imagined. After all, Troy was not his true home. Naturally, he couldn't utter such passionate, responsible, and protective words for a strange city. Since it was already a deception, why not be completely thorough? Why not just let the other party help him easily achieve his goal? But, I always feel like you're very urgent. As if something is chasing you from behind, forcing you to work so hard to become stronger. While the desire to become stronger is a good thing, overwork is counterproductive. At this moment, Hector looked at Yi with a frown. He couldn't understand. Or rather, he was somewhat worried about his friend. After speaking, he continued, to become stronger in a short time. Unless you accomplish a great feat like slaying a dragon in legends and bathing in dragon blood to become stronger. Or receive a blessing from a god. Or even obtain a powerful weapon, such as a divine artifact or a sacred sword, but these are all things that are hard to come by. However, with your talent, one day the gods will discover and be amazed by you. And then perhaps you might even receive the blessing and favor of a certain Lord God. And he fell silent upon hearing this. Single quote. Single quote. Slay a dragon. If he could slay a dragon, his raw strength would already be that of a hero among heroes, wouldn't it? Unless there was a dragon so weak that even ordinary human soldiers could wear it down and kill it. Then he might try to take it on alone. As for divine blessings and divine artifacts, the former required being noticed by a god. And a god's blessing was itself a god's favor. Which was not so easy to obtain. Acquiring this miracle also came with corresponding dangers. Gods, whose lifespans far exceeded those of humans, whether with good or ill intentions, could easily ruin a human if they lost control. Thanks for watching.